Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Georgia Williams. Georgia Williams was born on September 17, 1995, in Telford, Shropshire, England. She grew up in a close and loving family with her parents, Lynette and Steve Williams, and her older sister Scarlett. From an early age, Georgia demonstrated a kind and thoughtful nature, consistently looking for ways to help others and make those around her happy. This admirable quality eventually becomes her weakness. Despite being bullied in middle school, but Georgia's life improved in high school. She made a group of friends and became a well-liked and popular student. Her kind nature and good leadership skills helped her win the position of class monitor. She pursued her passion for helping others by joining the Air Cadets Corps, with the ultimate goal of becoming a medical officer in the Royal Air Force. At 17, Georgia started working at a local gas station, where she quickly became friends with her co-workers. One of them was Jamie Reynolds, a 22-year-old man who seemed quiet and isolated from the rest of the group. Georgia, being a kind and caring person, reached out to Jamie in friendship, wanting to help him feel less alone. Thanks to her efforts, Jamie started to fit in at work, participating in group activities and making friends with his co-workers. As time went on, Jamie developed strong feelings for Georgia, seeing her as the only person who had shown him kindness and believed in him. Feeling hopeful, Jamie started to think that maybe Georgia felt the same way about him. Emboldened by his newfound confidence, he mustered the nerve to express his true feelings to Georgia and inquired if she would be open of a romantic relationship. However, Georgia, being considerate of Jamie's feelings, let him down gently. She explained that she didn't want to ruin their friendship by getting romantically involved. Jamie seems to respect Georgia's choice and tries to maintain their friendship. However, he is actually harboring an increasingly unhealthy obsession with her. One day, while they were working together at the gas station, Jamie opened up to Georgia about his unhappiness with his life. He told her that he wanted to quit his job and pursue his true passions. Jamie had always dreamed of turning his passions into a career, and Georgia was eager to support him. One day, they started talking about his hobbies, and Jamie revealed his love for photography. Georgia saw an opportunity and encouraged Jamie to pursue it as a career. Excited about the idea, Jamie asked Georgia to help him create a professional portfolio and asked if she would be his first model. Georgia, being a good friend, agreed to help. They scheduled a photo shoot for Sunday, May 26, 2013, at Jamie's parents' house, with a few mutual friends joining in. However, as the day approached, Georgia found herself in a difficult situation. Her family was hosting a barbecue, and her grandparents, whom she hadn't seen in a long time, would be attending. Georgia thought about canceling the photo shoot at the last minute, but she didn't want to let Jamie down. She decided to keep her commitment and assured her family that she would only be a short drive away. She planned to quickly take a few photos and then return to her family's barbecue, hoping to make both her friend and family happy. On that day, Georgia got ready quickly, doing her hair and makeup, and wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Her father complimented her as she left home at 7:30 p.m., saying she looked beautiful, like Sandy from Greece. Georgia's family expected her to return home soon. However, as the hours went by and she didn't come home, her loved ones started to worry. At first, her mother wasn't too concerned, thinking Georgia was probably just busy with the photo shoot or spending time with friends. She sent a text asking when the photo shoot would end. Georgia replied, saying it had already ended and that she was with friends and might be home late. Her mother wasn't worried after getting the text, as it seemed like a typical message from Georgia, with the usual 3 kissy face emojis at the end. Georgia's mother trusted her to be responsible, which is why she wasn't worried at first. As the night went on, Georgia's parents went to bed, thinking she would be home by morning. However, when they woke up the next day and Georgia still hadn't returned, they started to feel uneasy. Georgia's mother sent her a text message at 6:30 a.m. asking where she was. But it wasn't until 7:30 a.m. that a response arrived, saying George had spent the night at a friend's house and her phone battery was running out. The message said that if George didn't respond again, it was because her phone had died. George's mother was unaware that the messages were not written by her daughter. On May 27th, Georgia's parents thought she would come home after a music festival. They expected her to come home the next morning because she was excited about her first driving lesson. As the night went on and George didn't come home, her parents became more and more anxious. They stayed up late waiting for her, but there was no sign of her. They contacted relatives and friends to see if anyone had heard from George, but no one had seen or heard from her in days. This makes them even more insecure and unsure of what is going on. When Georgia failed to return home the next morning for her scheduled driving lesson, her family quickly reported her missing to the police. They gave the police all the information they had, but they only knew that Georgia had been to a photo shoot at Jamie Reynolds' home and nothing about her whereabouts after that. The police started investigating and focused on Jamie Reynolds. What they found out about him was alarming and raised concerns for Georgia's safety. It turns out that in 2008, Jamie got into trouble with the law for assaulting and attempting to strangle a teenager. Despite the seriousness of the incident, he was let off with a warning and not charged. When the police discovered this, they suspected Jamie even more and considered him the main suspect in Georgia's disappearance. They went to his home, but no one answered. They broke in. They searched the premises but couldn't find Jamie, so prompting a large-scale manhunt to track him down. After conducting a thorough investigation at the petrol station, it was clear that none of Jamie and Georgia's co-workers had seen them. Their absence from work was unusual and raised concerns, as it was out of character for both of them. Although Jamie's parents were away on vacation, but they had already given the authorities key details about Jamie's van, such as its registration information. The police in Shropshire quickly shared this information with police agencies nationwide, asking them to be on the lookout for the van. Soon, authorities located Jamie in Glasgow, Scotland, which is 428 miles away from his home. His abrupt departure from the country, which came without warning, raised concerns and hinted at a potential problem. On May 30th, police in Glasgow arrested Jamie Reynolds at a local hotel due to suspicions of kidnapping Georgia. They immediately questioned him about Georgia's location, but Jamie claimed he didn't know where she was and provided no useful information to the investigators. He was then taken to Shropshire for more questioning. Meanwhile, Georgia's family and friends waited nervously for news, but what they heard about the investigation was deeply upsetting. The lack of progress was crushing, making their pain even worse. With Jamie in custody as the main suspect, the police searched his home for evidence. During the search, they found a camera with an SD card, but their hopes of finding important clues were crushed when they discovered that all the files had been deleted. The camera was sent to the police station for forensic analysis, where experts worked to recover the deleted files. Eventually, they managed to retrieve the data, revealed a shocking secret to the investigation. Among the recovered files are several images taken on the day Georgia went missing, providing a haunting look at she's final moments. The initial photos showed Georgia in normal poses at the start of the photo shoot, confirming she was at Jamie's residence that day. Although she appeared content and cooperative, it was clear Georgia had no idea about Jamie's sinister intentions. Sadly, she unintentionally entered a hazardous situation without realizing the risks, which ultimately led to her tragic death. As authorities went through the images, the tone became increasingly dark and unsettling. Subsequent photos reveal a series of harrowing incidents, depicting a distressed Georgia stripped of her clothes, standing weakly on a red recycling bin. Her hands appeared to be tied behind her back with a rope hanging ominously above her. The footage captured Jamie Reynolds' horrific act. He filmed Georgia's final moments, showing her desperate struggle for breath. He later committed heinous acts of necrophilia, violating her lifeless body in various rooms of the house. Jamie's parents' bed was where he further compounded the horror. He took hundreds of additional photos showing Georgia in degrading positions, documenting his depravity. He stripped her of her jewelry, keeping them as trophies of his horrific crime. The police conducted a thorough search of Jamie's home and found a large collection of explicit photographs and videos, including content that depicted extreme violence, sexual assault, and murder. It was discovered that Jamie was not only in possession of these materials, but also actively involved in creating content that featured violent acts. Jamie's parents were alerted to their son's disturbing interests and immediately ended their vacation to meet with authorities. They revealed that Jamie had been exposed to violent and explicit content from the age of 14. It is possible that he was exposed to such content even earlier. Although his parents tried to intervene by blocking access to certain websites, Jamie found a way to circumvent their efforts. At the age of 14, he contacted the internet provider and set up his own private Wi-Fi connection, which allowed him to continue accessing the blocked websites without his parents' knowledge. When Jamie's parents first found out he was watching these videos, they became worried and contacted the police and Child Protective Services. However, the authorities said they couldn't take any action because watching such content wasn't against the law. As the police looked into the matter further, they found a set of notebooks containing 40 separate stories written by Jamie. These stories were centered around harming, sexually assaulting, and murdering women. Additionally, investigators discovered that Jamie had searched social media platforms, printed and marked images of young girls with nooses around their necks. One of the stories, titled "Georgia Williams Surprised," has a very similar plot to the incidents that led to Georgia's death. Authorities believe this narrative may have been a pre-planned scenario, intended to be carried out from the start. Jamie began writing this narrative in January and finished it just 3 weeks before the murder. Despite being questioned, Jamie refused to reveal the location of Georgia's body, insisting he was innocent. As a result, investigators had to painstakingly reconstruct Jamie's movements from the Monday morning after Georgia's murder. They started by reviewing surveillance footage of Jamie refueling his vehicle at a petrol station. Unbeknownst to them at the time, Georgia's body was hidden in the back of Jamie's van. After refueling, Jamie drove 60 miles to a movie theater, leaving Georgia's body in the van parked in the theater's lot. He then went inside to watch a movie. However, police lost track of Jamie after he left the theater and issued a public appeal for help finding him. The appeal was successful, with people reporting sightings of Jamie's van near the New York G Mountain Pass. The area, with its dense woods and muddy terrain, was where Jamie tried to evade capture. Locals remembered Jamie in his van, especially after it got stuck in the mud and Good Samaritans helped him get it out. Police followed up on this lead and searched the wooded area where Jamie was spotted. Unfortunately, they found Georgia's naked body in this secluded spot. Georgia's body was returned to Shropshire after being recovered. A post-mortem examination revealed she died from asphyxiation due to a ligature around her neck. Forensic analysis also showed bruising on her back, indicating Jamie had used his knee to press her down. Initially, Jamie denied any involvement in Georgia's murder, but on the first day of his trial in December 2013, he suddenly stood up and pleaded guilty to all charges. During the trial, Georgia's father gave a heartfelt address to the court. They had to endure the pain for a long time as they witnessed their daughter's body lying motionless in the hospital's rest house, a traumatic experience that haunted both him and his wife. The trial also uncovered Jamie's previous run-ins with the law. In 2008, he received a warning from a judge for keeping a 1-year-old girl captive in his home. A disturbing incident foreshadowing Georgia's tragic death. In 2011, Jamie was criticized for recklessly backing his car into a girl's vehicle. This incident occurred after the girl had turned down his romantic advances. Although the case was eventually closed, Judge Mr. Justice Wilkie expressed serious concerns about Jamie's behavior, calling him a sexual deviant and warning about his potential to become a dangerous serial offender. As a result, Jamie received a whole life term, a sentence typically reserved for the most severe crimes, meaning he would spend the rest of his life in prison without parole. At the time, Jamie was the 46th person to receive this sentence and the youngest person in history to be given a whole life term. During sentencing, Judge Justice Wilkie highlighted the extreme suffering Georgia endured, emphasizing the torturous nature of her experience. Jamie's obsession with violent and sadistic pornography had led to a horrific display of control over his victim, ultimately resulting in her tragic death. Jamie Reynolds hung his head in shame as Georgia's parents and sister listened to the disturbing details of her death and the abuse she suffered at his hands. The courtroom was extremely tense as the jury saw gruesome images of Georgia's final moments, causing her family to leave in distress. In 2014, Jamie tried to appeal his life sentence but was unsuccessful. A review of the case the following year criticized police officers, children's services, and mental health professionals for their handling of Jamie before Georgia's murder. The review found that these agencies failed to work together properly, despite Jamie having come to the attention of law enforcement 5 years earlier for attempting to strangle another girl. Georgia's parents were deeply saddened by the report, regretting the missed chances to intervene and prevent their daughter's death. They stated that they cried when they read about the agency's failures, as it was clear that Jamie was likely to commit murder. They believed that Georgia's death could have been prevented. Outside the courtroom, Georgia's father shared the family's overwhelming sadness, stating that no sentence could ever satisfy them because it wouldn't bring Georgia back to life. He emphasized that their loss was irreparable and that Jamie, despite his lengthy prison sentence, still had the one thing he took from their daughter, life. He noted that what to cause them grief is that Jamie, even while serving a life sentence, still gets to live. Jamie Reynolds remains in prison to this day. Georgia's mother, Lynette, later wrote a book titled Our Georgia, in which she shared the family's traumatic experiences. The book highlights the failures of the legal system that allowed Jamie, a violent film enthusiast, to remain at large and eventually commit murder. This book is a heartfelt tribute to Georgia and provides an insight into the devastating aftermath of her tragic passing. Georgia's death caused immense pain to those who loved her, leaving a huge gap that can never be filled. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotton, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing." Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with 2 sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with 2 women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blandford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28th to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982, in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, to Lisa and Jay Poston. He had a strong and loving bond with his 3 sisters, Allison, Catherine, and Elizabeth, throughout his life. Growing up, Ryan had the opportunity to travel extensively and attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. This exposure broadened his horizons and gave him an adventurous spirit. Ryan was also known for his striking good looks, which, coupled with his charismatic personality, made him stand out in a crowd. After graduating from high school, Ryan attended Indiana University, where he earned a degree in political science, history, and geography. He excelled academically and graduated with honors in 2005. Following in the footsteps of his family members, Ryan pursued a career in law. He enrolled in the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University, driven by his admiration for the legal profession. His esteemed grandfather and uncle, both practicing attorneys, were his role models. Ryan's ultimate goal was to own a successful law firm. While in Cincinnati, Ohio, Ryan dedicated himself to helping people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Despite being young, he had already built a strong reputation, and many sought his advice. He worked hard to ensure everyone had access to fair and competent legal representation, regardless of their financial situation. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin Carissa for comfort and support. During a visit to Lexington, Kentucky to spend time with her, he met Shayna Hubers, a Lexington native, and his life took an unexpected turn. Shayna Hubers embodied the quintessential Southern girl, renowned for her outgoing personality and effortless ability to form friendships. Her warm and charming demeanor naturally drew people to her. After graduating high school in 2009 with a full scholarship, she continued her education at the University of Kentucky, majoring in psychology, before pursuing her master's degree in psychology at Eastern Kentucky University. Despite their 8-year age gap, Ryan was 29 while Shayna was just 21. Their feelings for each other grew increasingly undeniable. With each visit Ryan made to see his cousin Carissa in Lexington, he found himself devoting more time to Shayna. As they spent more time together, their bond deepened. Shayna began spending more time in Highland Heights, the Kentucky suburb where Ryan lived. Every weekend, she would pack a bag and visit Ryan's home, dedicating herself to taking care of him, cooking his meals, and cleaning his living space. As time went on, Ryan and Shayna's relationship grew stronger, and he took her to meet his parents. She was over the moon with excitement, telling her friends all about Ryan and even saying she wanted to become Mrs. Ryan Poston. But their promising future came to a tragic end on October 12, 2012. In a panicked call to the police, Shayna admitted to fatally shooting her boyfriend, Ryan. The details she shared revealed a devastating scene of domestic violence that had spun out of control. According to Shayna, Ryan had tried to physically abuse her, dragging her out of the house when she attempted to gather her belongings. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan had confronted her with a gun, leading to a physical fight. In the heat of the moment, Shayna managed to grab the gun, but she was intimidated by Ryan's size. In a state of panic, she pulled the trigger, ultimately shooting Ryan. Shayna admitted that she believed Ryan's death was inevitable, so she claimed she wanted to end his suffering. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan was in distress, making unusual sounds, which motivated her to shoot him several more times. Afterwards, she revealed that she left the gun on a bookshelf. Minutes after Shayna called 911 to report that she had shot her boyfriend, officers were sent to the scene. When they arrived, they told Shayna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually followed their orders. As she walked out, they told her to lie face down on the ground. It was clear that Shayna was very upset as she complied with their instructions. After the officers handcuffed Shayna and put her in the back of their patrol car, they entered the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. Crime scene investigators arrived and examined Ryan's condo, which looked a bit messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. They found that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned weapons, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic gun that Shayna used to shoot him. Based on the evidence they gathered, the investigators concluded that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna opened fire. They knew this because of the blood found on the table. However, the fact that several items on the dining room table were not disturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The crime scene investigators thoroughly searched Ryan's apartment, gathering every detail. At the same time, Police officers questioned Ryan's neighbors to see if they had any information that could help the case. One of Ryan's neighbors, a woman named Nikki, spoke to the detective and provided some useful insights. Nikki knew Shayna well and thought that Shayna was more committed to Ryan than he was to her. According to Nikki, the couple often had loud, angry arguments that disturbed the neighborhood. Nikki remembered a specific incident several months ago when Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid of Ryan. Shayna had told Nikki that she and Ryan had a violent fight, during which he lifted her up and threw her down the hallway, causing her injuries. Nikki believed Shayna and encouraged her to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna decided not to take legal action. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about the shooting of her boyfriend, Ryan. Before starting the interview, the officers read Shayna her Miranda rights, reminding her that she had the right to have an attorney present. Shayna chose to exercise this right and asked for a lawyer to be present. While waiting in the interrogation room, Shayna filled out some paperwork under the supervision of a detective. Despite having asked for a lawyer, Shayna still chatted with the detective. When asked who the victim was, Shayna calmly replied that it was the man she had killed. This response showed a clear lack of emotion, as it was obvious she knew the victim was Ryan, her long-term boyfriend. Shayna remained in the interrogation room with the detectives, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. She recounted the events of the previous night, describing how Ryan had allegedly grabbed her by the throat and violently thrown her around the apartment. At some point during the investigation, the detective temporarily left the room, replaced by another officer. Shayna began to reveal more details about her encounter with Ryan to this new officer. She alleged that Ryan had been extremely aggressive prior to the shooting, hurling insults at her, calling her crazy, and taunting her while brandishing a gun. Shayna believed that Ryan's behavior that night was fueled by drug use, which contributed to his violent outbursts. Throughout the interview, Shayna consistently stuck to her version of the events that culminated in the shooting. She claimed that Ryan was sitting at the dining room table, handling ammunition for his Sig Sauer pistol, when she noticed him staring aggressively at her from across the table. At that moment, she became aware of his intentions and realized he was trying to evict her from his condo. Shayna confessed to picking up the gun and firing it in the midst of the chaos, hitting Ryan with a single bullet. Shayna continued to describe the incident, claiming that after shooting Ryan once, she saw him twitching. Believing it was necessary to end his suffering, she fired multiple shots, ultimately killing him. In her confession, Shayna told the detective that Ryan was vain and had mentioned wanting a nose job, so she decided to grant him his wish. She deliberately aimed her gun at his face and pulled the trigger, essentially giving him the rhinoplasty he had requested. During the intense interrogation, Shayna expressed deep concerns about the impact of the incident on her academic performance and her future romantic relationships. She confided in the detective that having a dead boyfriend would make it difficult for her to find someone to marry, especially if they discovered she had killed him in self-defense. Despite her statement, the detective arrested and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna seemed genuinely surprised by her arrest, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecutor compared Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been charged with murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander, emphasizing the striking similarities between the two cases. This heightened the tension in the courtroom as everyone awaited the outcome. The prosecutor argued that Shayna was fixated on her ex-boyfriend, Ryan. According to the prosecution, Ryan dominated Shayna's thoughts, and she constantly discussed him. During the trial, the prosecutor presented testimony from Ryan's friends, who described his plans to end the relationship with Shayna and his efforts to avoid her phone calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna continued to visit Ryan's condo in Highland Heights uninvited, including on the night of the murder. The prosecution introduced evidence that Ryan had scheduled a date with Audrey Bolt, a former Miss Ohio, on the night of the murder. This information supported the prosecution's theory that Shayna was driven by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's potential new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that she was supposed to meet Ryan for drinks at a bar on the night of the murder, but he failed to appear. It wasn't until later that she learned of his murder. The prosecution also presented evidence that Ryan had repeatedly expressed his desire to end the relationship with Shayna in the days leading up to his death. Ryan had sought advice from his father, Jay, on how to handle the situation, and Jay had counseled him to be kind to Shayna to avoid a messy breakup. However, it appears that Shayna continued to exert control over Ryan on the day he was killed. The prosecution presented evidence of several text exchanges between Ryan and Shayna, in which Ryan clearly told her he did not want to see her that weekend because he had other commitments. Nevertheless, Shayna showed up uninvited at his condo, which was not unusual for her. The argument that ensued reached a boiling point when Ryan explicitly told Shayna their relationship was over and she could no longer control him. Prosecutors argued that this statement enraged Shayna, prompting her to pick up a gun and fatally shoot Ryan. During Shayna's trial for murdering Ryan, the prosecution showed a video of her being questioned by the police to suggest she was a cold-blooded killer. In the video, Shayna's calm behavior and responses seemed to back up the idea that she had intentionally taken Ryan's life. The footage showed her dancing and singing along to music, which seemed unusual for someone who had just killed their loved one in self-defense. Normally, people in such a situation would be distraught and crying due to the loss of life and the weight of their actions. The prosecution's goal in showing the video was to make Shayna appear detached and unemotional, implying that her actions were not those of someone who had acted in self-defense. They claimed that her lack of tears and carefree behavior proved her guilt. However, this interpretation was open to debate and up to the jury to decide. In the end, the video was a key piece of evidence in the prosecution's case against Shayna, but it was just one part of the evidence presented during the trial. Shayna's defense team stuck to a clear storyline throughout her trial, arguing that Ryan was the aggressive and violent one on the night of the incident, leading Shayna to shoot him. To back up this claim, they built a picture of Ryan's mental state, suggesting that a mix of drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines, contributed significantly to his behavior. The defense team presented the jury with autopsy results showing the presence of these drugs in Ryan's system, strengthening their argument that the drugs influenced his actions. An expert toxicologist testified for Shayna, stating that a combination of drugs like anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. This testimony aimed to provide a reasonable explanation for Shayna's actions, implying that she may not have intended to harm Ryan. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution grew increasingly worried that she might be acquitted due to being a smart, young, and attractive woman, and that her self-defense claim might persuade the jury. However, on April 23rd, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. At the August 2015 sentencing hearing, Shayna persisted in shifting the blame for Ryan's death onto him, which infuriated his friends and family. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial, Shayna stuck to her claim of innocence and refused to acknowledge her role in the events. Under Kentucky law, a defendant who is deemed a victim of domestic violence can be eligible for early parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge in this case ruled that Shayna did not meet the criteria, characterizing her crime as a premeditated murder. As a result, the judge handed down a 40-year prison sentence, making Shayna eligible for parole in 17 years, when she will be 41 years old in 2032. Shayna Hubers was sentenced, but she appealed for a new trial, which was granted by a judge in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had failed to disclose their felony conviction, which is against Kentucky law since felons are not allowed to serve on juries. Following a 4-month delay, Shayna's second trial for the murder of Ryan Poston began in August 2018. During the opening arguments, Shayna's defense attorney claimed that throughout her year-and-a-half-long relationship with Ryan, Shayna tried her best to make him happy. However, their romance suffered because of it. The attorney stated that on the very first night Shayna and Ryan met, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting effect on her, and it took her several weeks to respond to his messages after that. Shayna's defense lawyers claimed that her high school experience of sexual assault led to a history of alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They argued that this traumatic event contributed to her behavior on the night of the murder. The defense team aimed to create a sympathetic image of Shayna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They sought to challenge the prosecution's narrative, suggesting that her behavior was the result of a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. The defense portrayed Shayna as a victim of domestic violence at Ryan's hands, rather than as a cold-blooded murderer. They claimed that her actions were driven not by a desire for revenge or financial gain, but by years of abuse by her former partner. According to the defense, Ryan constantly criticized Shayna about her weight and chest size, pressuring her to enlarge her breasts. This constant pressure contributed to her low self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy, the defense argued. The defense claimed that Ryan and Shayna's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent disagreements and frustration from both parties. According to the defense, Ryan yearned for a more romantic and intimate connection, but this desire was not fulfilled, leading to a growing rift between them. To support this claim, the defense presented evidence that Shayna had sought an injection to improve her romantic life, which was meant to address the couple's sexual difficulties and strengthen their bond. However, the defense argued that Ryan's consistent rejection and disinterest worsened the strain on their relationship, causing Shayna to become increasingly frustrated and isolated. Moreover, the defense alleged that Ryan often broke up with Shayna, only to engage in conversations with other women. In contrast, the prosecution stated that while Ryan Poston was not a perfect boyfriend, he was not abusive. They argued that Shayna did not act in self-defense when she fatally shot Ryan, but rather because he had ended their relationship that night. The prosecution claimed that it was time for Ryan to break up with Shayna, as she refused to leave him alone despite the breakup, demonstrating her inability to move on from the relationship. One of Ryan's co-workers testified that the breakup between Ryan and Shayna would be permanent this time because Ryan had always avoided breaking up with Shayna in person. According to the co-worker, Shayna had made every effort to keep Ryan. The prosecution presented text messages in which Shayna told her friends that she and Ryan's romantic encounters had brought them closer together. However, Shayna testified that these encounters had actually driven them apart. In another text message exchange, Shayna asked Ryan for sex, but Ryan was taking antidepressants, which had reduced his sex drive due to the medication's side effects. However, when Shayna testified, she claimed that Ryan had forced her into sexual intercourse. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Shayna guilty of murdering Ryan, despite contradictory testimonies and conflicting evidence. During the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she begged the jury to consider granting Shayna parole, arguing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact people's lives. The mother acknowledged, however, that her pleas did not minimize the grief and pain experienced by Ryan Poston's family. Shayna was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. As part of her sentence, she must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kristen Rossum. Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate student at San Diego State University, had the potential for a bright future. However, she is now serving a life sentence at a women's facility in Central California for crimes committed against her husband, Ralph, and Constance Rossum. Kristen is a mother of 3, and despite her efforts to prepare them for a successful future, her own life took a different turn. Her children were receiving a well-rounded education with regular schooling, tutors, and participation in extracurricular activities designed to develop their talents. However, Kristen, who was fragile and impulsive, struggled to maintain this pace. She began to skip classes and sought escape from her reality, initially finding comfort and forgetfulness in this avoidance. However, after consuming alcohol, the calming effect wore off, and Kristen became dependent on methamphetamine, the most addictive illegal substance in the United States. The drug induced clouds of paranoia, euphoria, and hallucinations, leading to Kristen's erratic behavior and detachment from reality, as well as a lack of parental attention. Kristen confessed to being addicted to substances since her high school days, which was devastating news for her family of college-educated professionals. After months of turmoil with her parents, the 17-year-old Kristen secretly left home and went on vacation to Mexico with her friends, where she met Gregory DeVette, a tall, handsome man, 7 years her senior. Gregory took on a paternal role, and Kristen landed a job at the local forensic department as a toxicology assistant, impressing her employers with her skills and momentarily forgetting her addiction. Her position in toxicology gave Kristen access to controlled substances, and she went on to graduate from college with honors. Her relationship with Gregory lasted about 5 years, culminating in a grand wedding on May 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Gregory and were convinced that their daughter had overcome her dependency and was headed towards a life of great promise and happiness. In March 2000, Kristen landed a job as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, where she learned to analyze body fluids for controlled substances. However, she soon became disillusioned with her mundane life and sought thrills elsewhere. She found an opportunity with her new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had just been appointed head of the department. As their romance blossomed, Kristen's marriage to Gregory began to unravel, despite his efforts to save it. Aware of his wife's vulnerabilities, Gregory struggled to hold on, but Kristen had made up her mind. On Monday, May 6th, she asked for a divorce. On November, Kristen went to work as usual, but she was very tired and worried about her husband Greg, who was sick and stayed home. In the days following their difficult conversation, Kristen was uneasy, but Greg seemed calm and indifferent. Uncharacteristically, Kristen informed her workplace about her husband's illness and visited him during her lunch break. That same day, at 9:22 p.m., Greg was asleep, and Kristen called the emergency services to report that her husband was not breathing, fearing he might have taken his own life. Overwhelmed with emotion, Kristen cried on the phone and didn't follow the dispatcher's instructions to examine Greg's body and potentially administer first aid. The police and paramedics arrived at the scene at 10:19 p.m. and found Greg lying lifeless on the bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered rose petals, with an exposed stem nearby. A preliminary examination revealed that Greg had likely consumed a lethal dose of multiple controlled substances, with empty vials of strong painkillers scattered around the room. Torn wedding photos were also found in his bed. During the interrogation, Kristen stated that she had told Greg about their separation the previous night, a mere 17 months after their wedding. Kristen regretted marrying him, feeling she had rushed into it. She mentioned that Greg was too clingy and she wanted space. Greg's death was officially classified as a suicide, with the autopsy revealing that he had succumbed to a lethal dose of strong sedatives. Kristen gave her consent for the cremation to proceed, But Gregory's family and friends were adamant that he would never take his own life. None of them had noticed any unusual changes in his personality or mood that might have hinted at his supposed suicide. In fact, Greg was known to be strongly opposed to controlled substances and would never resort to using them. His relatives were so convinced of foul play that they intervened to stop the cremation, demanding an independent autopsy to uncover the truth. The family's persistence led investigators to consider a murder scenario soon after the incident. An autopsy revealed a significant amount of fentanyl, a painkiller 150 times stronger than morphine, as well as smaller amounts of clonazepam and traces of oxycodone. Investigators suspected that someone else might have administered the lethal dose of fentanyl to Gregory, given the strong influence of clonazepam and other drugs found in his system. Since fentanyl is not an over-the-counter drug, Kristen became the prime suspect due to her knowledge and access to these substances. She was subsequently questioned by the police. During the police questioning, Kristen's disheveled appearance and erratic behavior suggested she was struggling with drug dependence, which she confirmed in her testimony. On the day of Gregory's death, Kristen's account of events was inconsistent. She initially told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later suggested he might have been taking oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Like other opioids, oxycodone can not only relieve pain, but also produce feelings of euphoria. However, it can weaken the respiratory system, and if not treated promptly, its use can be fatal. During their conversation with Kristen, police considered the possibility that Gregory's death was an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. They also learned that Gregory was distressed about their failed marriage, which led Kristen to claim that he had taken his own life. This sparked another investigation, which uncovered more details. On November 8th, Russ Lowe, a co-worker of Kristen's, contacted the police and informed them about Kristen's affair with her boss, Dr. Robertson. This new information shifted the direction of the police investigation. Investigators found evidence of Kristen's relationship with Dr. Robertson, including passionate emails and computer files. They also discovered Dr. Robertson's expertise in fentanyl through professional articles. The evidence pieced together to suggest that Gregory had become a threat to the lovers. As Kristen had access to labs and controlled substances, it was suspected that she was secretly using them, and Dr. Robertson was covering for her. Dr. Robertson told detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug addiction. Although no charges were filed against the couple at the time, they were both fired for violating several rules during the investigation. Serious trouble began for Kristen in January when police raided her house, finding drug traces and evidence of personal drug use. She was arrested but later released on bail. As the investigation progressed, new information emerged, including her diary, which was seized during the initial search. Apparently, Kristen tried to conceal her involvement and assert her innocence by creating the illusion that her husband Gregory's death was self-inflicted. On the day of his death, she bought a rose, revealing her internal motivations. The medical examination revealed that Gregory was unconscious for at least 6 hours before he died, and his death may have occurred an hour or an hour and a half before it was officially confirmed. Furthermore, bruises were found around the needle mark on his arm. A shortage of the drug that led to Gregory's death, as well as other controlled substances, were discovered at Kristen's workplace. Police believe Kristen poisoned Gregory with alcohol and fentanyl without his knowledge. Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After 6 months in detention, she was released on bail, and the first trial began soon after. The prosecution's main theory was that she killed Gregory because he threatened to damage her good girl reputation by revealing her repeated drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution alleged that Kristen fatally poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a synthetic opiate that is 80 times more potent than morphine. According to them, Kristen initially attempted to kill Gregory using clonazepam. but after this attempt failed, she administered the fentanyl. The prosecution also contended that Kristen subsequently staged the scene in the bedroom to give the impression that Gregory had committed suicide by tearing out pages from her diary, scattering rose petals around his body, and positioning a wedding photo nearby. The court was told that Kristen, a biochemistry graduate, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to kill Gregory. Prosecutors alleged that Kristen tried to make her colleagues at the medical examiner's office believe Gregory's death was a suicide by withholding information about the fentanyl. However, before the autopsy could take place, Kristen was transferred to a different laboratory, and attempts to alter the toxicology report were unsuccessful. It was stated that on the morning of November 6th, Kristen phoned the owner of Gregory's apartment to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after arriving at the lab around 9 a.m., Kristen was seen crying in her manager Michael's office. The apartment building where Kristen and Gregory lived reported seeing Kristen return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she visited a local grocery store, buying several items, including a credit card statement with red roses, which confirmed she was still alive a few hours before Gregory's death. Kristen made several calls to Dr. Michael Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy. Dr. Blackburn testified that Gregory had been dead for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. At the time of death, Gregory was in the early stages of bronchopneumonia, a condition that occurs when breathing secretions accumulate in the lungs due to unconsciousness or inadequate breathing. The doctor also noted that Gregory's bladder contained a substantial amount of urine, which would have caused significant discomfort if he were conscious. From this, Dr. Blackburn inferred that Gregory had experienced breathing difficulties for around 6 to 12 hours before his death. Dr. Blackburn testified that the amount of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was insufficient to cause an overdose and was not the cause of death. In contrast, Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, explained that fentanyl is a powerful and fast-acting painkiller with serious side effects, including the potential to lead to respiratory arrest. The speed at which fentanyl takes effect depends on how it is administered, with peak effects occurring approximately 16 hours after a transdermal patch is applied, 20 to 30 minutes after oral administration, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes of intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley noted that fentanyl is not usually given orally because the liver breaks down about 65% of it, leaving only 35% to enter the bloodstream. Both Dr. Blackburn and Dr. Stanley were unable to provide a clear explanation for how fentanyl entered Gregory's system. However, Dr. Stanley suggested that the varying concentrations of fentanyl in Gregory's body, combined with evidence that he was unconscious and breathing shallowly in the hours leading up to his death, indicate that fentanyl may have been administered to him. Although the prosecutor could not definitively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, the evidence suggested that she might have applied a fentanyl patch to his arm while he was sleeping. The fact that 15 patches went missing from the lab where Kristen previously worked supports this possibility. The defense claims Kristen is innocent, acknowledging that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but arguing that he intentionally took it to end his life due to desperation stemming from family problems. In court, Kristen testified that on November 6th, she woke up to find Gregory in distress. At 7:42 a.m., she called his employer to report his illness and absence from work. Kristen told the court she went to her job but returned home to check on Gregory, asking why he was so upset. Gregory told her he felt unwell, having taken oxycodone and clonazepam, and planned to stay home and sleep. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor questioned Kristen's explanation, pointing out its strangeness. Kristen admitted to previously lying and hiding Gregory's drug use. The prosecutor suggested to the court that fentanyl was the ideal poison due to its difficulty in detection, knowledge Kristen likely acquired from her job. According to autopsy and toxicology results, Gregory was unconscious for around 6 to 8 hours, contradicting Kristen's claim of having lunch with him that day. The defense argued that Dr. Blackbourne's finding of non-fatal blood levels of clonazepam was irrelevant because the combination of oxycodone, an opiate, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, can create a synergistic effect, making them more potent together. They suggested that Gregory may have unintentionally taken the drugs himself and questioned why the high levels of these substances in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and murder under special circumstances by poisoning. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Despite maintaining her innocence and pleading no contest, Kristen's appeal was unsuccessful due to a mistake by her own defense team. They acknowledged that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites, which could have determined whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or if the fentanyl found in the samples resulted from laboratory contamination after his death. The appeals court was told that there was a problem with the handling of the autopsy samples, which could have affected their integrity. Specifically, the samples were stored in an unsealed cardboard box, with each container labeled as coming from Gregory's body. The box was left at the medical examiner's office for about 36 hours before being sent to the forensic laboratory, which raised concerns that someone with access to the office could have tampered with the samples during that time. Kristen's appeal argued that on November 8, 2000, Michael had informed a toxicologist that he had tested a sample of Gregory's stomach contents for fentanyl breakdown products. However, this information was not included in the original autopsy report. The Court of Appeal ruled that Kristen's lawyer should have objected to the prosecution's claim that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose and should have tested the autopsy samples for substances that break down into fentanyl, instead of just accepting that as the cause of death. Although the conviction was not overturned, the case was sent back to the federal court to determine whether this mistake by the defense could have changed the trial's outcome. U.S. Supreme Court ruled federal courts must respect state court decisions, denying Kristen's appeal and keeping her in custody. Her trial named Michael Robertson, Kristen Rossum's former boss and lover, as co-defendant. Though he's lived freely in Australia since 2000, he could be arrested and bailed for $100,000 if he returns to the... Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Cave. Jennifer was born in March 1984 near Bishop, Texas, where her family lived in a modest farmhouse. Her mother, Sharon, was in her second marriage, which added 3 children to the family: Jennifer, Lauren, and Clayton. Vanessa, from Sharon's first marriage, was the oldest sibling. Jennifer's father, Charlie, worked as a welder and was a decent husband and father, until his alcoholism turned him into a mean and unbearable person who would hurl insults and cause trouble. When he was sober, he was calm and respectable. Sharon's family stayed close despite their unstable home. She worked at a chemical plant and cared for the kids. Jennifer, unlike her outgoing siblings, was shy and book-smart, developing exceptional memory. However, her love for reading affected her eyesight, requiring glasses, which didn't boost her self-esteem, but didn't stop her from participating in school activities. Eventually, her father's destructive drinking habit caused her family to break apart. After the separation, Jennifer and her brother Clayton chose to stay with their father, Charlie. They showed him great compassion and tried to support him in overcoming his addiction, hoping to prevent his downfall. Jennifer was so desperate to help her father quit drinking that she ignored his lack of determination to fight his habit. 4 years after her parents' divorce, in 1999, Sharon met Jim Sedgwick, a new partner. As Jennifer entered her teenage years, she underwent a transformation. She got rid of her braces and contact lenses and replaced her glasses, which brought out her natural beauty. However, her personality began to change along with her physical appearance. She started socializing with kids from troubled families, but thanks to her high intelligence, she managed to graduate at the top of her class. Jennifer majored in finance at Texas State University, but soon became disillusioned, withdrawing after one semester. She then attended community college, worked part-time, and dated Mark from a respectable family. However, she began frequenting parties, drinking heavily, and using marijuana, possibly influenced by her father's substance abuse. On one fateful night, Jennifer Cave's life took a tragic turn when she met Colton Panic. A gunshot wound to her right arm ultimately led to her demise. The bullet pierced her arm and chest, striking her heart, causing rapid blood loss from a vital artery. Further examination revealed multiple stab wounds across her body, with the most severe injuries on her chest and neck. The attacker inflicted a total of 18 stab wounds after she had died. In an attempt to conceal the body, the perpetrator decapitated Jennifer and shot her through the throat into her head. They then tried to dismember her by severing her upper limbs and placed them in prepared bags and trash bags. The torso was left in the bathtub, covered with a saw. However, something disrupted the initial plan, forcing the perpetrator to change their actions. Upon discovering Jennifer's body, the police arrived but lacked a warrant to search Colton Patak's apartment. Initially, they could only observe the scene and secure the area. After obtaining the necessary warrant, a thorough search of the apartment was conducted. The investigation turned up 3.38 caliber shell casings, and the firearm was found in Patak's car, parked in the garage. A large, blood-stained machete was recovered from the dishwasher. Toxicology reports showed that Jennifer had alcohol, marijuana, and methamphetamine in her system at the time of her death. In one of the rooms, investigators found a road atlas with certain pages torn out, specifically those highlighting routes in southwest Texas. This discovery provided a crucial clue, suggesting the reason behind the apartment owner's sudden disappearance. Colton Panic had fled the area. As a result, law enforcement immediately issued a warrant for his arrest. Colton was born in Bryant, Arkansas, and grew up to be a charming and clever boy who was popular among his female peers during his teenage years. His father's successful agricultural business provided the family with a comfortable lifestyle. However, this comfort seemed to spoil Colton, making him both ambitious and hot-tempered. In his free time, Colton was passionate about skateboarding and playing the guitar. He attended a Catholic boys' middle school in Little Rock, where he excelled academically, frequently making the honor roll. He was also a National Merit Scholarship finalist in 2000. By his senior year, Colton had started to get into trouble with alcohol and fights, largely due to his association with a group of wealthy kids who lived a life of leisure, often hosting parties with undesirable consequences. Despite these problems, his high graduation scores secured him admission to the University of Texas at Austin. Unfortunately, he failed to focus on his studies, instead continuing his reckless lifestyle, losing friends, and earning a reputation as a frequent drinker and marijuana user. If not for his self-destructive tendencies, Colton could have had a bright future. Colton was kicked out of his university fraternity and began selling drugs. His parents tried to help him overcome his addiction, even going so far as to take him back in at home. In the spring of 2004, Colton met Jennifer at a party, and they immediately clicked. Despite her tendency to idealize people, Jennifer decided to take a chance on Colton rather than walk away from the potentially dangerous relationship. Over time, their friendship blossomed into romance. As their relationship grew, Jennifer started using illegal drugs with Colton. His apartment, once luxurious, became a hub of excess, with drug use becoming a normal part of their daily lives. As a result, Jennifer's addiction worsened. Her parents repeatedly attempted to intervene, even giving her a car in the hopes that she would spend more time at home. However, each time she returned, her promises to change were short-lived. Colton's condition deteriorated, and he became increasingly paranoid. In an attempt to emulate a gangster, he started carrying a gun and knife. In 2004, he was arrested for possessing illegal substances and even attended a rehabilitation program, but he showed no genuine commitment to overcoming his addiction. Jennifer's parents visited her, but the visit was disappointing. She had failed to keep her promises, had lost a significant amount of weight, and looked unwell. Her family suggested she seek treatment at a rehabilitation center, but she refused outright. This upset her parents, Sharon and Jim, who then cut off her financial support, hoping that their tough love approach would motivate her to take control of her life. With no money, Jennifer had no choice but to move in with Colton. What happened between Jennifer and Colton in his apartment remains unclear, but after living with him for a month, Jennifer made the decision to leave. A friend came to her rescue, offering a room and emotional support. Although Jennifer confided in her friend about her fears and no longer felt safe around Colton, she chose not to elaborate on the details. Whatever it was, it clearly terrified her, and she refused to consider getting back together. When Colton showed up asking her to take him back, Jennifer stood firm in her decision. Her resolve only strengthened when she noticed he was carrying a knife. She urged him to calm down and suggested they maintain a platonic relationship instead. To her surprise, he agreed. From then on, Jennifer kept her distance from Colton and began rebuilding her relationship with her parents. For the first time, her life was slowly getting back on track. In early 2005, Jennifer started dating Scott, a single father who seemed like a breath of fresh air. Unlike Colton, Scott led a stable life, working as a waiter, playing keyboards in a band and singing, all while staying sober. As they spent more time together, Jennifer's self-confidence grew, and she even looked healthier by his side. She took on a maternal role, caring for Scott's daughter and keeping their home. However, she still had a lingering fear that she might flee at a moment's notice if Colton were to call her again. Colton moved to the Orange Tree Apartments near the university after Laura Hall arrived. The complex had a pool, making it a party spot. Colton's behavior remained unpredictable, with friends reporting he played Russian roulette alone. It was at one of these parties he met Laura Ashley Hall, who became infatuated with him. She showed jealousy towards other women, especially Jennifer, and came across as arrogant to their peers. Colton and Laura started dating soon after. Like Jennifer, Laura was deeply drawn to Colton. When he was sentenced to 60 days in jail in June 2005, Laura sent him all her earnings, even going into debt. Friends noticed that she changed for the worse, becoming bolder, neglecting her job and personal care. Many believed she had also started using banned drugs. Unlike his behavior with Jennifer, Colton disregarded Laura's feelings, even going so far as to extinguish cigarettes on her. During this period, Jennifer broke up with Scott because she felt unworthy of his family and didn't want to cause them any problems. Although she occasionally talked to Colton, who still had feelings for her, she kept their conversations friendly and didn't rekindle their romance. Jennifer's main focus was on finding a job and going back to college. In August, things started looking up for her. She began dating Michael Rodriguez, and after completing a few days of training, landed a great job at a law firm. Jennifer felt proud of herself and was genuinely happy. On August 16th, she decided to celebrate her new life with friends. They went to a bar and then a club that evening. According to a friend, the bouncer refused to let Colton in because of his appearance, which might have led him to look for drugs. The investigation is ongoing to uncover what happened that fateful night. Investigators interviewed Colton's neighbors and discovered some interesting information. At around 3 a.m. on August 17th, Nora Sullivan heard a knock on her door and found Colton standing there, looking suspicious with blood on him and a visible gun at his waist. Startled, she asked him what had happened, and Colton claimed he had been in a shootout with some people. However, Nora didn't hear any gunshots and thought he was lying, as he often did. She closed the door and peeked through the peephole to see him eventually walk away. When questioned, none of the neighbors reported hearing any gunshots that night either. Detectives discovered that Colton had been in contact with Laura twice on the night of the murder. The next morning, August 17th, he visited a hardware store where he bought a saw, masks, gloves, and a large quantity of cleaning supplies. He used these items to dismember Jennifer's body and planned to clean the apartment to destroy any evidence of the crime. The unexpected arrival of Sharon and Jim may have startled him, causing him to flee. A crucial discovery in Colton's apartment led investigators straight to him. Colton, accompanied by Laura Hall, was tracked down in Mexico, where they had crossed the border in Laura's car. During this time, local authorities distributed Colton's photo nationwide. The couple enjoyed themselves in Mexico, visiting cinemas and restaurants, and stayed in a hotel in the border town of Piedras Negras. An employee at the hotel recognized Colton from the distributed photo and took his picture, sending it to the police. Mexican law enforcement arrested the pair and handed them over to U.S. officials at the border. Before being released, Laura Hall caused a scene with the Border Patrol, loudly proclaiming Colton's innocence and hindering the arrest process. However, she later admitted that their trip to Mexico was the best experience of her life. In total, they spent around 5 days abroad. On August 23, 2005, Colton Poniak was arrested and charged with a crime related to Jennifer Cabe's death. A month later, Laura Hall was arrested and charged with tampering with evidence and obstructing justice. During the trial, prosecutors presented key evidence found in the apartment, including a store videotape and a receipt for items purchased. Colton claimed he had no memory of the night of August 16th-17th, blaming his amnesia on heavy drinking and illegal drug use. Initially, he didn't deny involvement in Jennifer's death, but insisted he had no recollection of the events. He claimed to have woken up to find his ex-girlfriend's body in the bathroom, and then contacted Laura, who allegedly advised him to buy a saw and cleaning supplies. Together, they allegedly dismembered the victim and hid the body parts in bags. Prosecutors argued that Laura was responsible for Jennifer's injuries after her death. Colton later implied that Laura might have been motivated by jealousy, suggesting she sought revenge against a romantic rival. Despite these allegations, both Colton and Laura pleaded not guilty. The evidence of Colton's involvement in the crime was overwhelming. His fingerprints and DNA were found on the machete, saw, and firearm at the crime scene, and the weapon in his car was identified as the one used in the crime. Additionally, Jennifer's body was found in his apartment, and he was the one who purchased the cleaning supplies from the store. The jury had no doubt of his guilt. On January 29, 2007, Colton Poniak was sentenced to 55 years in prison with parole eligibility after serving at least half of his sentence, with his earliest release date set for 2060. The case against Laura Hall was more complex. The prosecution argued that she might have acted out of blind affection for Colton. While Laura's DNA was found on one of the victim's shoes, a store towel, and the firearm, the defense contended that this only indicated her involvement in disposing of the body, not in the initial act. They couldn't prove she was the one who fired the first shot that hit Jennifer in the head. Moreover, there was no evidence that placed her at the scene at the time of the crime. Laura maintained that she only learned of the crime when Colton told her, and claimed he forced her to flee to Mexico with him. However, witnesses from their time in Mexico reported that they seemed to enjoy their trip in 2007, which cast doubt on Laura's story. Laura Hall was convicted of obstructing justice and tampering with evidence and received a 6-year prison sentence. In a subsequent trial in 2010, she was given the maximum sentence of 11 years and a $144,000 fine. She was paroled on March 15, 2018, with GPS monitoring, and completed her sentence in August of the same year. However, her current whereabouts are unknown. Colton Poniak is still in prison, where he has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been unsuccessful. Throughout these appeals, he has consistently claimed to have no memory of the tragic events of that night. However, He has revealed that there are witnesses who claim Laura confessed to Jennifer's death. Ponak alleges that during the trial, the prosecutors were aware of this information, but failed to disclose it to his defense team, suggesting that he may have been set up. Although Ponak's legal motions were denied, this revelation has raised questions among the public. Moreover, Jennifer's parents believe that Laura's punishment was too lenient. They are convinced that she played a more significant role in Jennifer's death than she admits. Unlike Colton, Laura has never expressed remorse or regret for Jennifer's death, often referring to her as that girl or the dead girl, and sometimes using derogatory terms. To this day, the specifics of that fateful night remain a mystery. Jennifer is the only one who knows the truth that the walls of Ponak's residence keep hidden. Unfortunately, the dead cannot reveal their secrets. Jennifer's life was tragically cut short in its prime. If only she had realized sooner that staying away from certain people and cutting off ties with them can be a means of self-preservation. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kendra Hatcher. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980, in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley. Her parents divorced, and her mother later married Bruce Jimon. She had 3 sisters, Jamie Coleman Ashel Lepum, Melissa Jameson, and a brother, Neil Hatcher. Kendra grew up in Pleasant Plains, where she studied dentistry. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to Dallas and started working at Smile Zone, a dental studio. As a devout Christian, Kendra wanted to use her dental skills to help others, providing free services to disadvantaged children at the clinic. In her spare time, Kendra was involved in various activities, including teaching Bible studies and participating in volunteer programs. These programs involved building churches abroad and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. After moving to Dallas, Kendra's professional career took off rapidly. Her personal life also began to blossom when she met Dr. Ricardo Palacios through a dating app on May 24, 2015. Kendra and Ricardo shared similar values, interests, and life goals. Ricardo was completing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Despite having only been together for a few months, they were already discussing their upcoming marriage. A tragic incident in a parking lot took the life of Kendra, cutting short all their future plans. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators examined the evidence and initially suspected robbery as the motive, given that Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. They found bullet fragments and a gun magazine near her body. However, the circumstances of the shooting and the bullet wounds suggested that robbery was not the primary motive. One bullet struck Kendra in the back, while the other hit her in the head. The entry wound was at the top of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin, indicating that she had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was later confirmed when investigators obtained CCTV footage and reconstructed the events. The footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. 30 minutes later, Kendra returned home and parked in the same garage. Shortly after, a man approached her, shot her, and then ran to the side before jumping into the Jeep and driving off. Although the video quality was poor and the crime scene was not clearly visible, the authorities were unable to identify the assailant. However, they put the vehicle on a wanted list and appealed to the public for assistance. A man named Ortiz contacted the police after recognizing his car and footage related to the shooting. Ortiz claimed that, although the car belonged to him, he was not involved in the shooting and was not driving it at the time. He explained that, on the morning of September 2nd, he had lent his Jeep to 2 of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who asked to borrow it until the evening. Later that evening, Brenda called Ortiz to meet her at a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez drove the Jeep back to Ortiz's house. When Ortiz saw his Jeep on the TV news, he confronted Brenda, who initially denied that it was his Jeep. then admitted that Crystal had used it without his knowledge. Brenda tried to persuade Ortiz not to report the incident, offering to pay to have the Jeep repainted. At first, Ortiz was hesitant to get involved with the police, fearing it might jeopardize his pending U.S. citizenship. However, he eventually decided to cooperate and provided the police with the names of Brenda and Crystal. The police then tracked the movements of the Jeep on the day of the crime and located the two women. Brenda Delgado was the first to be questioned, but she claimed to have no knowledge of Kendra Hatcher and provided an alibi, stating she was at a restaurant with Ortiz at the time of the crime and produced receipts as proof. However, as the investigation continued, the truth slowly emerged, revealing the attempts by the perpetrators to conceal their involvement. Brenda Delgado came from a modest family. Her parents, Luis and Maria, immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father worked in a factory. Brenda excelled academically and dreamed of attending medical school, but her parents couldn't afford the tuition. After high school, she continued to live with her parents, working as a dental assistant and at a spa, while still aspiring to a more affluent and beautiful life. Brenda balanced her dental assistant job with spa work, where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, she fell for Ricardo at a Jennifer Lopez concert. 3 months later, she moved in with him. Ricardo was smitten, meeting her parents, and Brenda gushed about her love in a Facebook birthday post. Brenda discovered she was pregnant, but Ricardo convinced her to have an abortion, leaving her devastated. After recovering from the ordeal, Brenda focused on her career and her beloved Ricky. She enrolled in Stanford that fall. Although it seemed like Brenda had moved on from the breakup, she was still hurting. Her obsession with Ricardo intensified, and when Ricky posted a photo with his new girlfriend, Kendra, a model-like beauty, Brenda was consumed by dark thoughts. Those close to her claimed she fantasized about harming Kendra. Investigators suspected Brenda had a strong motive to harm her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky met Kendra. Despite this, Ricardo believed he and Brenda remained friends and didn't think there was any bad blood between Brenda and Kendra. The reconstructed events revealed a disturbing picture of how manipulative and ruthless an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado concocted a sinister plan to win back her former lover, Ricardo, and eliminate Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had moved on to. Initially, Brenda posed as Ricardo's supportive friend, pretending to take an interest in his relationship with Kendra. Unbeknownst to Ricardo, she gathered information about their future plans, which he naively believed was genuine concern. After Kendra's death, Ricardo confided in Brenda via text message, pouring out his grief. Brenda feigned sympathy, offering to help him in any way possible. Unaware of her true intentions, Ricardo trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that Brenda had been secretly manipulating him for months. She had been snooping on his mail, learning about his plans with Kendra, including their travel arrangements. This discovery fueled her anger, and she became fixated on eliminating Kendra, whom she believed had usurped her place in Ricardo's life. Brenda took control of Ricardo's phone account and used it to stalk him, keeping close tabs on his activities and those of his girlfriend Kendra. This obsession soon became her sole purpose in life. Brenda's fixation on stalking eventually led her to quit her job and dedicate all her time to achieving her twisted goals. Over time, she devised a cruel and terrifying plan to murder Kendra and take her place beside Ricardo. To put her plan into action, Brenda approached several acquaintances with an offer to harm Kendra in exchange for money. She eventually found a 21-year-old single mother, Crystal Cortez, who was struggling financially and willing to assist her. Crystal recruited a perpetrator, Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Brenda paid Crystal $500 and provided her with illegal substances, which Crystal then passed on to Christopher. Several women were tasked with following Kendra to learn her daily routines and identify the best location and time to carry out the crime. On September 2nd, 2015, they borrowed Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher lay in wait for Kendra in the parking lot, but lost their nerve and didn't follow her home from work due to fear of getting stuck in traffic. Later that evening, they finally carried out their sinister plan and were rewarded for their efforts. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were arrested. They both denied any involvement in the crime and claimed they were not at the scene. However, when the police found the murder weapon in the car, Love's story fell apart. Meanwhile, Crystal's alibi was inconsistent and confusing. At first, she claimed she was driving in the parking lot because an armed carjacker had taken over her SUV and forced her there. She even falsely stated that her young son was with her, but surveillance cameras showed no evidence of a child. As the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, Crystal changed her story again, this time offering to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence. She implicated Brenda, claiming that she was the mastermind behind the crime and that they had been planning it for 2 weeks. According to Crystal, Brenda's obsession with winning back her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo, drove her to despise Kendra, whom she believed had taken her place. Brenda had pretended to be happy for Ricardo, but her life was actually unraveling. According to Crystal, Brenda decided to get rid of Kendra Hatcher at this point. In Crystal's testimony, she detailed how Brenda devised a plan to kill Kendra, enlisting her support. Brenda and Crystal started formulating a plan to kill Kendra, meeting several times and developing multiple plans. Initially, they planned to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then dispose of her body. However, to avoid suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around rough neighborhoods, asking people if they could help, which led them to Christopher Love, who agreed to help and participated in deciding the method of the crime. The three of them decided that shooting Kendra would be the quickest way to kill her. Crystal cooperated with authorities, revealing September 2nd wasn't a random choice. Brenda knew Kendra and Ricardo were going to Mexico, so they decided to kill Kendra before their trip. They wanted it to look like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal tracked Kendra's movements for days, noting her activities minute by minute. They traced her route home and entered the apartment complex's parking garage on September 1st, 2015, to set up the crime. Brenda and Crystal made a final check on the day of the crime. They picked up the Jeep and Christopher, dropping Brenda at the library to establish an alibi. Crystal and Christopher waited near Kendra's apartment, then followed her, losing her in traffic. They waited at her house, and when she arrived, Christopher shot her. Crystal claimed she didn't see it but heard the shot. She drove Christopher home, picked up her son, and returned the Jeep to Jose. Brenda's plan had finally come to fruition. She had eliminated her rival, and all she had to do was wait for a message from her beloved Ricardo. Brenda was thrilled to have committed the perfect crime. However, Crystal's subsequent confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about her guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. When the police arrived with the warrant, Brenda was no longer at home, having fled to Mexico using her dual citizenship. Brenda's involvement in a contract killing came to light after she fled, and on April 6, 2016, she was placed on the FBI's wanted list. With a $100,000 reward offered for information about her, she became the 9th woman to ever be listed among the most wanted fugitives, and the only woman on the list at the time. However, her freedom was short-lived, as she was apprehended just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, by Mexican authorities, who extradited her to the United States on October 6, but only on the condition that she would not face the death penalty. Brenda was charged with capital murder in the U.S. At her 2017 Texas trial, relatives of Kendra and Ricardo spoke out. Witnesses testified, confirming Brenda's intentions and obsession with her ex. Her cousin Moses revealed Brenda's depression and her attempt to hire him to hurt Kendra. Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo, said friend Jennifer Escobar. Brenda read Ricardo's emails, tracked his movements, and had his house key and bank access. She asked Jennifer to kill or disable Kendra Hatcher, offering $2,000, a car, and drugs. Jennifer refused after consulting her parents. In court, multiple people who knew Brenda testified about her obsession, and it was established that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She viewed Kendra as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, specifically reuniting with Ricky. In the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda's obsession grew increasingly intense, as corroborated by evidence presented in court. This evidence included an ATM withdrawal receipt for $500, which Brenda later gave to Crystal as payment for her role, as well as a $600 cash payment received by Christopher Love. Furthermore, cell phone records revealed that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together before the crime, with over 99 calls exchanged between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, demonstrating their frequent communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. Despite an alibi and receipts showing she was at a restaurant, the jury quickly found her guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. Delgado was sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez, who cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty, received a 35-year prison sentence with parole eligibility. The Hatcher family expressed satisfaction with the court's decision and quietly left the courtroom following the verdict. On the other hand, the Delgado family, who knew Brenda as a loving daughter and woman with strong Christian values, refused to believe she was involved until the end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sydney Loof. Sydney Irene Loof was born on August 21, 1993 in Broken Bow, Nebraska, to George and Susan Loof. She spent her childhood in Arcadia with her parents until 2000, when the family moved to Ney, where her mother worked as a special education teacher and her father was the school principal. Growing up, Sydney was an energetic and outdoor-oriented girl who loved nature. Her father, George, often took her fishing during her school years. She was also involved in sports, playing basketball and golf, where she showed promise. However, she developed scoliosis, which forced her to give up many of her favorite activities and ended her sports career. After graduating from high school in 2011, Sydney found employment at a local Menards store that specialized in home improvement products. Despite moving from Norfolk to Lincoln for work, Sydney remained close to her family, who made an effort to stay in touch almost daily and regularly met for dinner. Although she lived independently, Sydney frequently returned to her parents' house. Sydney had been battling depression, feeling that the medications she was on were actually making her condition worse. Her mom, Susie, was deeply concerned and urged her to see a new doctor, who prescribed different medications. During phone calls with her mom, Sydney's voice sounded increasingly optimistic as she reported that her mental state was improving. She was attempting to make positive changes in her life, including searching for a new job, as working in a store didn't fulfill her ambitions. However, she was still uncertain about her career goals, which contributed to her feelings of depression. By November 2017, Sydney's mental health had taken a turn for the worse, leading her to take antidepressants and occasionally smoke marijuana. Despite her family and friends offering support, she yearned for romance and love. As a young modern woman with an interest in the same gender, Sydney sometimes turned to social media to find potential dates. To expand her social circle and find a friend, she used Tinder, a popular dating app. In November 2017, Sydney met a man named Aubrey online, and they started exchanging messages. They quickly discovered they had a lot in common, including a love for gambling, hiking, and good food. After just 100 messages, they decided to meet in person on November 14th. Sydney visited Aubrey at his home in Wilbur, and their first meeting went really well. They hit it off and agreed to meet again the following day at Aubrey's house. Before their second meeting, Sydney worked her shift at the store, went home, and got ready. She even took a photo of herself and posted it on Tinder with the caption, "Ready for my date." When Aubrey arrived, they drove off together. The next day, however, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was unusual for the normally reliable Sydney. Despite her high spirits in the days leading up to her disappearance, her family was worried when her coworkers informed them that she hadn't shown up. Sydney's mother, Susie, revealed that her daughter had been struggling with anxiety and depression in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sydney had discussed her deteriorating mental health with her family, who advised her to see a doctor again to take antidepressants. That was the last time Sydney's family saw her. When Sydney's parents went to her apartment, they were extremely surprised to find that she had left her favorite cat, Mimsy, without food or water. This was extremely unlike the caring pet owner they knew Sydney to be. Concerned, they reported Sydney missing to the police. During a welfare check of Sydney's home, the police found the apartment locked and saw nothing out of the ordinary. However, the family remained adamant that something was wrong, and the police took their concerns seriously. On November 16, 2017, Sydney Loof was reported missing after failing to arrive at her workplace, the Menards store showroom on 27th Street in Cornhusker Highway. Sydney had a spinal condition that affected her gait, making her stand out in a crowd. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a white Columbia brand jacket and a cream-colored shirt. According to her parents, Sydney told her friend on Snapchat on Wednesday morning that she had gone on a date with a man she met online the previous night and planned to meet up with her again that evening. Her car was found in Northeast Lincoln, and police conducted interviews, searching for any leads that could help locate Sydney. A massive search effort was launched to find Sydney, featuring highway billboards with her photo and a televised manhunt. Susie remained adamant that something had happened to her daughter after her date. To support her claim, she shared a screenshot of a Snapchat post by Sydney, captioned, "Ready for my date." Sydney's friends confirmed that she was planning to meet a woman named Aubrey, whom she met on Tinder. During the investigation, police examined Sydney's phone records and surveillance footage from her workplace, which led them to identify a key person of interest. They traced Sydney's last phone signal to a cell tower in the Wilbur neighborhood, likely close to Aubrey's residence, although they had no information about Aubrey's identity at the time. Authorities started looking for a man named Aubrey, who was the last person to see Sydney before she went missing. The problem was that no one knew Aubrey's real identity or if he even existed. Sydney's friend Brooklyn took matters into her own hands and decided to track down Aubrey using Tinder. She downloaded the app, found Aubrey's profile, and exchanged phone numbers with him. This allowed the police to finally learn Aubrey's real name, which was Bailey Boswell, a 26-year-old woman. Further investigation revealed that Bailey lived in an apartment near the cell tower where Sydney's phone was last connected. Bailey shared this apartment with her partner, 52-year-old Aubrey Trail. Bailey Boswell, from a normal and wholesome family in Lyons, Iowa, grew up as a friendly and successful student who excelled in basketball and running. However, following her father's death, her life took a downward turn. She started keeping bad company and got involved with alcohol and illicit drugs. On a dating website, Bailey met Aubrey Trail, a man with a history of fraud, issuing fraudulent checks and theft. Aubrey had created a cult where he referred to himself as the Vampire Daddy and paid women $200 weekly to follow his unusual rules. At the time of Sydney's disappearance, Aubrey and Bailey faced a court order to pay over $40,000 in fraud reparations and had multiple misdemeanors against them. On November 19, 2017, they went into hiding. When police searched their apartment, they found that some walls had been scrubbed with bleach, which a neighbor confirmed. After a few days, the police located Aubrey and Bailey at a hotel in Branson, Missouri, and took them into custody a few weeks after Sydney's disappearance was reported. A thorough examination of phone records and Bailey's location data led the police to the gruesome discovery of Sydney's remains. Her body had been dismembered, with 13 parts found in black plastic bags and ditches in Clay County. Tragically, some of her organs, including her heart, were missing. Bailey and Aubrey were charged with first-degree murder, improperly disposing of human remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Bailey pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. Aubrey, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty to felony murder and conspiracy, but guilty to improperly disposing of human remains. However, Aubrey's various statements were inconsistent, and he often appeared confused, changing his account of events and introducing new characters. He made bizarre claims, including that he was a vampire who could fly, and spoke about witchcraft. Aubrey claimed to be a cult leader and vampire, telling authorities he had witches in the cult who needed to kill another woman to gain powers. In one of his early court hearings, Aubrey admitted to killing Sydney Loof, but said it was an accident. He claimed to have paid Sydney $5,000 to participate in a threesome with 2 other women, which Sydney had agreed to. However, during the act, he strangled her with a cord by mistake. Aubrey also confessed to cutting Sydney's body into pieces, a ritual according to his beliefs, to release her soul to the gods in a sacred place. He believed this would help her reincarnate faster. However, the prosecution presented evidence contradicting Aubrey's story. Surveillance footage from November 14th showed Aubrey and Bailey checking into a Lincoln hotel near Sydney's home. The following day, they visited a home improvement store, buying a hacksaw, bleach, a folding saw, a stationary knife, and the bags used to store Sydney's remains. Furthermore, a surveillance camera caught Sydney encountering Aubrey at the Menards store on November 15th, unaware of the danger she was in. On June 11, 2018, the first court hearing took place regarding the murder and improper burial of Sydney Loof. Although separate trials were ordered for Bailey and Aubrey, the charges against them were essentially the same. The trials were held in Lexington because the defense attorneys successfully argued that a fair trial would be impossible in Wilbur due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. The prosecution's case rested on the argument that Sydney's death was a premeditated murder, as evidenced by the fact that she was strangled and that the crime was carefully planned and executed. The jury listened to 3 other women who had previously dated Aubrey and Bailey, all of whom they met through Tinder. Each of these women had been intimate with Bailey and had also been involved with Aubrey. One of them shared that she had even gone on a trip with them after they met, during which Aubrey gave her $200 a week and invited her to join his group, which he called Witches, telling her that she would have to torture and kill someone to become a member. Another woman testified that Bailey had discussed breaking her fingers and dissecting a body in detail, revealing her fascination with torture. The prosecution pieced together the events of the fateful evening of November 15, 2017. Sydney had arranged to meet a woman she had known for a couple of days, with whom she had been chatting on Tinder. Bailey picked Sydney up from her apartment, and they drove around in his car. The car eventually stopped at Bailey's house, where Sydney was coaxed into the apartment. Once inside, Bailey and Aubrey attacked her, strangling her with an extension cord on the living room floor. Afterwards, Bailey and Aubrey meticulously cleaned the apartment, which the prosecution argued was a premeditated act. The next day, November 16th, they dismembered Sydney's body and dumped her remains in Clay County. The court heard testimony from Jennifer, the landlord, who stated on November 16th, she drove into the garage and immediately noticed a strong chlorine smell that intensified when she entered the house. The medical examiner testified that Sydney's death was ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Toxicology reports showed that Sydney had antidepressants in her system at the time of death. In addition to the missing organs, the upper left arm, from just above the elbow to below the shoulder, was also found to be missing from Sydney's body. The prosecutors sought the death penalty for both defendants, and if the sentence was deemed unjust, the case would be retried. However, Aubrey denied any involvement in the occult and pleaded guilty only to improperly burying Sydney's remains. During his trial, Aubrey shouted that Bailey had no involvement in Sydney's death, claiming Bailey's innocence. In a dramatic turn, Aubrey then slashed his throat 3 times with a razor blade but survived and was detained until he made a full recovery. Aubrey testified he lied about Sydney Loof's death, admitting he met her in 2017 and paid her for illegal activities. He claimed Sydney died accidentally during an intimate act with an extension cord in November 2017. Aubrey confessed to dismembering and dumping her body, but maintained it was an accident, and he didn't seek help because he thought no one would believe him. Aubrey confessed to getting rid of Sydney's body, claiming it was an accident from an extension cord during intimate act. Bailey denied involvement, with her lawyers saying she was also a victim of Aubrey's manipulation. However, phone records and location data proved Bailey's involvement, tracking her near where Sydney's body parts were found. The court learned that Bailey initiated contact with Sydney and arranged a meeting. Bailey drove to Sydney's duplex on the evening of November 15th to pick her up. The prosecution claimed that Bailey took pleasure in discussing cruel acts and enjoyed talking about torture with Aubrey. Evidence presented in court revealed a planned crime on the day Sydney was killed. Bailey and Aubrey went to Home Depot around noon that day, where they bought tools, including a hacksaw, scissors, and a box cutter, as part of their plan. Bailey sent Sydney a text message inquiring about her day, and phone records and surveillance footage show that she sent the message from the Menards parking lot, where Aubrey was also present. Sydney, who worked at Menards, seemed unaware of Bailey's presence. A few hours later, Bailey sent Sydney another message on Tinder, stating that she was at Sydney's apartment and would pick her up soon. However, phone records indicate that instead of going on a date as Sydney believed, Bailey and Aubrey went to the apartment where they lived. Bailey's attorney, Todd Lancaster, argued that the evidence only showed that Bailey was guilty of aiding and abetting the improper disposal of Sydney's body by buying bleach in garbage bags. On November 8, 2021, Bailey Boswell received a life sentence. The Loof family had waited 3 long years, grieving and yearning for their Sydney, anticipating a verdict that would bring them solace. Prior to this, on July 11, 2019, a jury took less than 3 hours to convict Aubrey Trail of premeditated conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and improper burial of human remains. A 3-judge panel described his crime as cold and calculated. In the trial's second phase, determining whether he should face execution, county prosecutors secured the death penalty for Aubrey Trail, fulfilling their promise. Consequently, on June 9, 2021, Aubrey Trail was put to death by lethal injection. Aubrey Trail, the con artist accused of brutally murdering Nebraska woman Sydney Loof, allegedly deceived his cult followers by claiming to be a flying mind-reading vampire with a coven of 12 witches. He claimed these witches gained their powers by killing people. Fortunately, in this real-life story, justice prevailed, and through the trial, the monster faced the end of his trail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Belinda Temple. 1986 was the year Belinda started her college education in her hometown. Unlike her twin sister Brenda, who attended Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed close to home. Her decision was largely influenced by her relationship with Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years her senior. Belinda was deeply infatuated with Marshall, and this relationship began during her high school years. However, Belinda's parents were not in favor of this relationship. They feared that being involved with Marshall would hinder their daughter's opportunities for a prestigious education. They also worried about the potential consequences of an early pregnancy, which might lead to Belinda dropping out of college altogether. The disapproval of Belinda's parents led to numerous arguments at home. Belinda's mother was particularly opposed to the idea of her daughter moving in with Marshall before marriage. She made her stance clear by stating, "He is nobody to you." Once you're married, you can move out, but until then, you have a home here." This remark seemed to only strengthen Belinda's resolve. In a bold move, Belinda and Marshall announced their decision to get married during a family dinner. Despite the tension, they shared their plans, which was met with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Belinda's mother was visibly upset but seemed resigned to their decision, gritting her teeth and remaining silent for the rest of the evening. In reality, Belinda had made up her mind to marry Marshall as a way to assert her independence and prove to her parents that she was capable of making her own decisions. They didn't have a grand wedding celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, invited a few close friends, and she and Marshall signed the papers. Afterward, they strolled around the city, enjoying champagne and each other's company. The next day, Belinda packed her belongings and moved in with her husband, who was still living with his parents. They hadn't planned to rent a separate place. Getting married didn't change much in their relationship. As mentioned earlier, Belinda's primary reason for marrying was to gain independence and stop her mother's nagging. However, her new life turned out to be quite unpleasant. Less than 6 months later, Marshall started spending less time at home, claiming he was working late. In reality, he was seeing another woman. Belinda discovered this when she noticed her husband acting strangely. One day, she waited until his work hours ended and followed him, which is when the truth came to light. She saw Marshall walking hand in hand with a woman she didn't know, likely a colleague. The deceived wife, Belinda, left her husband, Marshall, after discovering his infidelity. She didn't create a scene, but instead packed her belongings and returned to her mother's house. Marshall tried to win her back, but Belinda was too proud to forgive him. They eventually got a divorce. A few years later, Belinda was pregnant and working part-time at a school. Despite her pregnancy, she was concerned about missing the upcoming basketball competition between schools and not being able to prepare her team properly. Her colleague, Richard Bachman, didn't share her enthusiasm and had often expressed his disinterest in teaching. Belinda couldn't understand why Bachman, a 40-year-old man who seemed uninvested in his job, still held his position. As a diligent teacher, Belinda noticed that one of her students, Riley Joe Sanders, a high school senior, had been absent from class for months. She reached out to her colleagues to determine if the issue was specific to her class or if Sanders was a habitual truant. Her colleagues told her that Sanders came from a troubled home and rarely attended school, implying that his absences were not Belinda's problem. That evening, Belinda decided to take further action. She visited Riley Joe Sanders' mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious conversation with her. Although the talk seemed to have an impact, it didn't quite yield the results Belinda had hoped for. Sanders began attending class and participating on an equal level with his peers. However, during a basketball game, when Belinda called out Sanders for pushing an opponent and exhibiting poor behavior, he responded with insults and threats, warning her to be careful, especially in the evenings. After her breakup with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left for her in her hometown. She decided to follow her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. It was there that Belinda found her true calling. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a basketball coach and had high aspirations. At the same university, Belinda met David Temple. Like her, he was a part-time coach but for soccer, and he also played for the university team as its captain. Soccer had been an integral part of David's life since childhood, and it was clear even then that he was destined to excel. He consistently performed well for his team, earning the respect of all his teachers. Despite his difficult nature, which could lead him to insult or even physically confront others, David's behavior was often overlooked because of his on-field performance. During games, he would become fully engaged and find it difficult to calm down for a long time afterward. However, one of his teammates later revealed that David's aggressive behavior was due to his use of steroids. David's behavior changed significantly when he was with Belinda. He became a caring and chivalrous partner, but with one major caveat: he would become aggressive and confrontational if he perceived anyone as a threat to their relationship. Belinda was well received by David's parents, who admired her love for sports, a common interest she shared with their son. However, Belinda's twin sister and friends were less than thrilled about her relationship with David. They had known Belinda as a strong-willed and independent person, but since being with David, she had become more subdued and focused on pleasing him. Her relationship with her family also suffered, with less frequent phone calls and visits, which naturally caused concern among her loved ones. As graduation approached, David and Belinda adopted a bull terrier named Shaq. After receiving their diplomas, they got married in 1999. January 1999, David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. With the due date nearing, doctors predicted Belinda would go into labor within a couple of weeks. As with many pregnant women, Belinda was frequently exhausted, and caring for their son Evan added to her fatigue. One evening, David decided to give his wife a break from household chores and allow her some rest. To minimize distractions, David took Evan for a walk in the park. As they strolled through the fresh air, their hunger grew, so they stopped at a cafe for a snack. After their cafe visit, David and Evan headed home. Upon arrival, David noticed the front door had broken glass. He quickly told Evan, "I'm going to take you to visit Harland for a bit, okay?" Without waiting for Evan's response, David led him to a neighbor's house, where family friends lived. Evan, struggling to keep up, asked, "Why can't we go to Mom's?" David, unsure of how to respond, said, "Mom's in the hospital right now." The neighbor, Quentin Harland, had just opened the door to unexpected visitors when David rushed past him, taking his son into the living room without a word. David then ran towards his own house, leaving Quentin confused. Quentin shouted to his wife to care for the child and followed David. "What's going on?" Quentin asked, but before David could respond, they reached David's house, where Quentin saw the front door was broken. Upon entering, Quentin saw the house was in disarray, with open closets and belongings scattered everywhere. A trail of blood led to the stairs, prompting Quentin to push David aside. Under the stairs, in the dressing room, they found Belinda lying face down with a severe head wound. David, seemingly in shock, didn't react. Instead, he took out his phone and called the police. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene, but they were initially unable to enter the house due to the Temple family's aggressive bull terrier, Shaq, who growled and barked at the unfamiliar men in uniform. One officer drew his gun in response, but David intervened, shouting at them to put their guns away and rushing to restrain the dog in the garage. Upon entering the house, the police assessed the scene and concluded that the perpetrators were likely burglars who had not expected Belinda to be home. Despite her pregnancy, they had shot her to eliminate her as a witness. When police started investigating a crime scene, they were baffled by how the burglar got past the fierce dog, Shaq, that guarded the house. They were also unsure how the perpetrator distracted the dog. Upon closer inspection of the front door, police found broken glass, but its positioning suggested it was broken while the door was already unlocked, which seemed strange. Inside the living room, a box on the nightstand caught their eye, containing jewelry such as earrings, rings, and a gold chain. What puzzled them was why the thief left the jewelry untouched. As police spent more time in the Temple family home, they became increasingly convinced that the whole scene was staged. In their experience, thieves usually take all valuables they can carry, but in this case, nothing appeared to be missing. The presence of the dog continued to raise suspicions, leaving them feeling that something was off. Regarding the murder, Belinda was shot in the back of the head with what was likely a 12-gauge shotgun while kneeling with their back to the killer. However, Shotguns are an unusual choice for robbers due to their bulk and difficulty in concealing and transporting. This, combined with the fact that the murder took place at 4 p.m., makes it improbable that a thief would be openly carrying a shotgun at that time of day. When questioned by police about firearms in his home, David mentioned owning a couple of rifles, which he showed to the officers. Notably, the shotgun that could have been used in Belinda's murder was not among the firearms he presented. David went to the police station voluntarily to give a statement and detail the items that had been stolen. Despite appearing nervous, he was cooperative with the police. During this time, his son Evan stayed at Quentin's house, oblivious to what had happened. In 1996, David Temple and Quentin Harland were neighbors and co-workers at a school. They were close friends and often socialized together outside of work, watching sports and hosting barbecues with their families. However, their friendship became strained when Heather Scott, a new teacher, joined the school. Quentin was attracted to Heather, but she rejected his invitation to dinner. What Quentin didn't know was that David had also developed feelings for Heather, and they started a secret relationship. Quentin was angry and hurt when he found out that his married friend, who had a son, was involved with someone else. Despite his feelings, Quentin kept David secret, even as their co-workers began to notice the romantic connection between David and Heather outside of school. Heather didn't know that David was married, as he didn't wear a wedding ring and kept his personal life private. Belinda had no idea about David's secret life. She once confided in Quentin about her suspicions that David was cheating on her, but Quentin quickly dismissed her concerns. "You're just being paranoid," he told her. "David is a devoted husband and family man. How could you think such a thing?" However, there were signs that something was off. David, who had once been extremely respectful towards Belinda, now frequently insulted her, even in front of others. He would call her fat, despite her only gaining a little weight after childbirth, and would often ask her to leave the room when they had guests, implying that her appearance was embarrassing. Belinda didn't stand up for herself or have a serious conversation with David about his behavior. Instead, she cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. David became increasingly estranged from his family due to a new relationship with a coworker. He put more psychological pressure on his wife, Belinda, and their communication consisted only of insults. Although he never physically harmed her, the verbal abuse continued. That year, Belinda discovered she was pregnant again. The news made her forgive David's past transgressions, and she felt ecstatic. David attempted to appear as a happy father, but it seemed insincere. Sometimes, he would not come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask why because she feared his angry outbursts and the potential scandal that could follow. A pregnant Belinda often asked her husband David for help in preparing for the baby's birth, such as running errands, fixing up the nursery, and installing shelves. However, David consistently ignored her requests, leaving Belinda to handle everything on her own, including shopping, painting, and assembling furniture, despite being 8 months pregnant. As Christmas approached, Belinda suggested discussing gift ideas with David, but he proposed skipping gifts that year to save money for the baby. Given the doctor's warning that Belinda might go into premature labor, this seemed like a reasonable decision. However, on Christmas, David didn't even get Belinda a small gift. Instead, he announced that he was leaving to spend the New Year's holidays with friends on a hunting trip. Belinda confided in her sister, who immediately changed her plans to be with Belinda, ensuring she wouldn't feel abandoned, especially since labor could start at any moment. David, during the holidays, spent the time with Heather, who wore a gold necklace given to her by David as a Christmas gift. By 2007, it appeared that David Temple had all but moved on from his wife's murder, as if Belinda had never been a part of his life. The fact that it had been 5 years since the murder and the killer had yet to be caught seemed of little concern to him. He had married Heather in 2001, and together they were raising Evan. The police suspected David of wrongdoing, but they couldn't gather enough evidence to prove anything. While investigating the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they discovered that a house on the next street had been burglarized 8 days before the murder at the Temple house. The perpetrator was none other than Riley Joe Sanders, a persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught, who had previously threatened her. He was called in for questioning immediately. Riley had no alibi for the day of the murder, and his father owned a 12-gauge shotgun. However, when the police searched the Sanders house, they did not find the weapon. Realizing the police had reason to detain him, Riley confessed that he was with friends on the day of the murder. He had hidden this information because they were smoking pot in a large group, and he did not want to implicate his friends. As a result, the charge against Riley was dropped. In November 2004, police officers arrived at David's doorstep, handcuffed him, and informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering Belinda Temple. David denied the allegations. His trial began in 2007. The investigation revealed that David's motive for the crime was his new relationship with Heather. Colleagues of David testified that during Belinda's pregnancy, he boasted about replacing his fat and pregnant wife with the younger and more attractive Heather. According to the prosecution, David killed Belinda as soon as she returned home from work, as evidenced by her still wearing her work uniform and shoes. They alleged that he then staged a robbery, scattering belongings around the house, before quickly driving to the park with his son to create an alibi. The prosecution also highlighted several suspicious facts, including that nothing was stolen from the house, and a fierce dog in the yard would have prevented any stranger from entering. Furthermore, witnesses reported seeing David's car stopped near a rice paddy, where the murder weapon was likely discarded, with only his son Evan present in the vehicle at the time. However, the shotgun was never found in the area where the crime occurred. Heather testified that before Belinda's murder, her relationship with David was not serious, and she didn't even love him. This statement introduced uncertainty into the jury's decision, as it raised questions about David's motive. Would he really kill his wife over a non-serious relationship, or was Heather lying to protect him? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, a friend of Riley Sanders came forward to the police to clear David's conscience. According to this friend, Riley had previously confided in him about taking his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home. Riley wanted to teach his teacher, David Temple, a lesson. Riley claimed that he had almost entered the house, but was thwarted by a bull terrier that ran out of the garage. He shot at the dog but missed, and fearing the noise would attract neighbors, he quickly ran away. This new testimony was submitted to the court, prompting a review of the case. David was released from prison on bail while the review was underway. Meanwhile, Heather decided she no longer wanted to be married to someone who had spent so much time in jail and whose future was uncertain. She filed for divorce. The jury took a long time to deliberate on David's sentence. The case wasn't revisited until 2023, when David was still awaiting a final decision on his sentence. David was ultimately convicted and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. Throughout the trial, his son Evan struggled to accept that his father was capable of committing such a heinous crime. Evan continued to support his father until the very end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Her family and early life are not well documented. She spent her childhood in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. Samadi attended a local school, where she demonstrated a challenging and conflicted personality from an early age. She had difficulty accepting rejection and often used force or deception to get what she wanted. People who knew her recall that Samadi's striking appearance and perfect figure made it easy for her to charm men, but she struggled to maintain relationships. Her beauty and charisma were matched by her greed and vanity, which led her to prioritize material wealth and self-interest above all else. This attitude often discouraged potential partners. Additionally, Samadi became intensely jealous and aggressive after brief relationships. Samadi's doll-like appearance led to her working as a Barbie lookalike at a large Universal bookstore for several years. This earned her a flattering nickname that stuck with her throughout her life. After high school, Samadi had in love with a successful local TV journalist named Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, who was 16 years her senior. Samadi had a long and serious relationship with Osvaldo, with whom she had 2 children, Christopher and Christina. However, due to constant scandals and jealousy, they separated in 2012. After Osvaldo's sudden death, it was discovered that he had not included Samadi in his will. Samadi took matters into her own hands and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent his relatives and heirs from entering. She also took some valuable items that belonged to Osvaldo. His family members were outraged and went to court to accuse Samadi of theft. The police eventually forced Samadi to leave the house, but she was not charged with a crime. Samadi had other relationships, including one with Miguel Angel Perez, with whom she had a daughter named Maria. This relationship was reportedly official, but ended in divorce after a few years. Samadi allegedly gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent, contradicting claims that she was unmarried at the time. Interestingly, some of her lovers have mysteriously disappeared or died under unclear circumstances, yet this trend went unnoticed for a long time. For instance, one of Samadi's lovers went missing shortly after deciding to end their relationship with the reportedly temperamental and aggressive woman. Despite relative suspicions of her involvement, his disappearance remains unsolved due to lack of concrete evidence. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadi. His murder was initially attributed to a botched robbery, but the perpetrators were never caught. Speculations about Samadi's role in the crime persisted, albeit without solid proof. Her most notable alleged victim was Gerardo Cruz, a Costa Rican native born in December 1992 in San Jose. Gerardo never knew his biological father, who left the family before his birth. His mother, Ana Patricia, later married Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted and raised Gerardo as his own. Gerardo's younger sister, Milena, was born a few years after him. He had a peaceful and carefree childhood and youth. Gerardo attended a regular school, enjoyed motorcycles, and met his true love, Carol, at a young age. By 23, he, Carol, and their 4-year-old daughter Genesis moved into his aunt and uncle's house in San Sebastian, a suburb of the city. Gerardo took a job at a local bakery to support his family. They were happy, especially with the news of a second child on the way. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samadi, a 40-year-old woman who regularly visited the bakery. She was attractive, fashionably dressed, and flirtatious. As Samadi aged, she began to have relationships with younger men, likely flattered by their attention. Despite their nearly 20-year age difference, Gerardo became infatuated with Samadi and started secretly meeting with her. She visited the bakery almost daily, catching the attention of other employees. Samadi often brought her 19-year-old daughter, Christina, to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo balanced his family life and secret meetings with Samadi without either woman knowing about the other. However, Gerardo soon let his guard down, boasting to friends and colleagues about his relationship with Samadi, describing her as a terrific mistress who spoiled him with gifts. Rumors about Gerardo's affair soon reached his mother, who attempted to persuade him to end the relationship. The affair was short-lived, ending in October 2015, when Samadi discovered that his mistress, Gerardo, was married with a pregnant wife and a young daughter. Upon learning this, Samadhi became enraged. She began harassing Carol, Gerardo's wife, with threatening calls and messages, warning her that Gerardo would be harmed if he didn't return to her exclusively. Gerardo apologized to his wife and reconciled, keeping their family intact. He underestimated Samadhi's malice, thinking she would move on and calm down after the breakup. However, Samadhi's vindictiveness was more intense than Gerardo anticipated. Shortly after the breakup, Gerardo witnessed a disturbing incident. While walking downtown, Gerardo noticed an older man secretly filming under a young girl's mini-skirt with his phone. Outraged, Gerardo took out his phone to record the scene. He then approached she, told her what was happening, and advised her to report the incident to the police. Gerardo chased the man for about 2 minutes, trying to get a clear shot of his face on camera. During the chase, Gerardo asked loudly if the man was enjoying taking photos of his sister's underwear without their consent. The man eventually jumped into a taxi and escaped. That night, Gerardo posted the video on his social media page, and it quickly went viral. Internet users identified the man as Luis Solmano Delgado, a former Ministry of Finance employee. As a result, Gerardo became a national celebrity, giving daily interviews to newspapers and appearing on TV and radio shows. He condemned Delgado's actions and stated that he had no regrets about exposing him. However, Delgado's lawyers began working against Gerardo, accusing him of violating the law by distributing the video. They prepared a lawsuit against him, which left Gerardo surprised and confused. He couldn't understand why he was being judged for exposing his actions, rather than the man being held accountable for his behavior. Gerardo's last interview was on October 7th at a local radio station. Feeling confident and believing he had nothing to hide, he spoke openly. The following day, Gerardo had plans to meet his friend Oswald after work, but he suddenly canceled, citing an unexpected emergency. It was later revealed that he had received a message from Samadhi, luring him to the park that evening under the pretext of another interview. Gerardo had no reason to suspect anything was amiss and trusted his former lover. After finishing work, he went to the agreed meeting point, but instead of journalists, 2 unknown men were waiting. They took his bag, assaulted him, stabbed him multiple times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. Before losing consciousness, Gerardo managed to call a friend and report the incident. The friend immediately alerted the police and medical services. Thanks to the swift response, Gerardo was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. He underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, finale, they were unable to save him. Gerardo passed away on November 19th in the intensive care unit. Initially, multiple theories emerged about the crime. The first theory suggested it was a robbery murder. Gerardo was indeed attacked in a park at night, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife, which made it appear to be a typical theft. However, just a few days before, Gerardo had released a sensational video that compromised a well-known former government official, leading to a second theory, that the murder was an act of revenge. The media openly speculated that the former government official may have hired hitmen to kill the young man who had damaged his reputation. The murder sparked intense debate in the press, with protesters demanding that the perpetrators be caught and brought to justice. The police explored various theories, searching for other potential enemies of Gerardo. For months, the investigation stalled. However, in May 2016, a breakthrough came when footage from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The video showed 2 men fleeing the scene where Gerardo was fatally attacked. These individuals immediately became the prime suspects, and the police worked to identify and apprehend them. The footage proved to be crucial evidence, and once it was made public, the case started to move forward. It was repeatedly shown on news programs, with viewers asked to take a close look as the individuals could be dangerous. Police created rough sketches of the suspects and described their physical characteristics. One of the suspects soon came forward, hoping that cooperating with the investigation would lead to a reduced sentence. The information provided by the cooperating suspect led investigators to several accomplices and the crime's organizers, Samadi and her daughter Christina. All individuals involved in the crime were eventually taken into custody. Those arrested included Ronald Archie, a cab driver who helped locate the perpetrators, Cesar Chavez, a laborer who acted as an intermediary, and Omar Costa, a young miner who directly participated in the attack and had been tracking the victim on the day of the incident. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all parties involved through phone records and text messages. Samadi, who had meticulously planned the crime, had enlisted the help of her daughter Christina. Together, they recruited friends Ronald and Cesar to find hitmen to kill Gerardo, staging it to look like a botched robbery in a nighttime park. They were later joined by Omar, who was responsible for ensuring the victim went to the pre-arranged location. Samadi personally chose October 7th as the date for the massacre. On that day, she was in frequent contact with all parties involved, assigning roles and verifying that everyone adhered to the plan. Gerardo was attacked, stabbed multiple times, and robbed of his bag and jacket. These stolen items were later given to the police as evidence. The primary evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages detailing the murder plan and each participant's role. Samadi was so confident she wouldn't get caught that she didn't bother deleting the incriminating messages. Her motive for the crime was jealousy. She didn't want to share her lover with his wife. If she couldn't have him, no one would. She carefully planned the crime, involving her own daughter, who assisted her throughout. Samadi and her daughter were immediately arrested, with no possibility of bail due to the risk of them fleeing the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar, the youngest participant, who was handed over to juvenile authorities. The investigation spanned a year and a half, concluding in December 2017 when the trial of all parties involved in the criminal conspiracy commenced. It was revealed that Samadi had a history of run-ins with the law, including a prior arrest for forging documents to obtain state benefits, for which she received only a fine. New information also emerged about Miguel Angel Perez, ex-husband of Samadi. It was discovered that Samadi had given their child Perez's surname without his consent. She then successfully petitioned the court to order him to pay child support, which he did for over 3 years. However, it was later uncovered that the entire process had been fraudulent. As a result, Samadi was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a substantial fine. During the trial, Gerardo's wife testified that she had been aware of his affair with Samadi. She stated that Samadi had threatened Gerardo with death, but he had not taken these threats seriously. The primary motive behind the crime, as previously stated, was Samadi's jealousy and wounded pride, stemming from her inability to accept that her younger lover had chosen to remain with his wife. Thanks to phone records, it was discovered that the mother and daughter had planned the crime together. Additionally, after the release of the CCTV footage showing the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was close to going to the police to confess. However, her mother calmed her down, assuring her that the investigation would not lead to them. The verdict was announced on January 23, 2018. According to the court's decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while Christina, Ronald, and Cesar each received 25-year prison sentences. One of the killers was sent to a juvenile detention center, and the other had not been found at the time. Omar, who had been stalking the victim, was acquitted. The victim's family was awarded $140,000 in compensation for their loss. After the verdict, the family expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment of Gerardo's killers. However, it soon became known that Samadi and Christina's lawyers had filed an appeal to reduce their sentences. As a result, each participant's sentence was reduced by 5 years. Samadi is currently serving her 25-year sentence in a Costa Rican women's prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kelsey Smith. Kelsey Smith was born on May 3, 1989, in Overland Park, Kansas. Kelsey was the third of 5 children in a close-knit family. Her parents, Gregory and Missy Smith, raised her alongside her siblings, Steve, Lindsay, Kat, and Zach. Gregory Smith, the family patriarch, was a retired U.S. Navy veteran and had served in the police force for over 20 years. He was enjoying his retirement after a long and dedicated career. Kelsey grew up in a loving family environment, close to all her siblings. Kelsey's mother, Missy Smith, has dedicated her life to health care, working at a local hospital for many years. Despite her busy career, she has managed to balance work and family life well, raising her children and creating a warm family environment. Kelsey has been an active, outgoing, and creative child since she was a child. She enjoyed singing, dancing, and playing musical instruments, which she learned in music school. She was also active in school theater and choir performances. Kelsey is also passionate about sports, especially gymnastics and soccer. She often attends sporting events with her father and brother, cheering on her local team. With a great sense of humor and many talents, Kelsey has left a deep impression on those around her. Her love for animals, which began in childhood, inspired her dream of becoming a veterinarian after college. During her senior year of high school, Kelsey found work at the local symphony orchestra, where she played the clarinet at various city events. Through this job, she set a goal of saving enough money within 6 months to buy her first car, a 1987 Buick Regal. Although her parents were concerned that the car was an older model, they offered to contribute to the cost so that Kelsey could buy a newer car from the family budget. However, Kelsey was determined to buy her first car herself, using only her own savings, so she turned down their offer. The Kelsey family prioritized providing their children with a well-rounded education, focusing on education and personal development. They also instilled in their children a strong sense of discipline. The family had clear rules that everyone followed without exception, including sharing their plans and notifying each other if they would be out late. Kelsey demonstrates her adherence to these rules by being punctual, sharing her whereabouts with her parents, and informing them of her social activities. During her senior year, Kelsey began a romantic relationship with John Beer Smith. She describes it as deeply in love and like the relationships depicted in books or movies. They celebrated New Year's 2007 together and have been virtually inseparable ever since. John, who is 1 year older than her, appears to be a responsible and caring partner who treats Kelsey with respect. Both sets of parents approve of their relationship. In May 2007, Kelsey turned 18, graduated from high school, and was accepted into a prestigious university in Kansas to study veterinary medicine. This was one of the happiest times of her life. However, these happy days did not last long. Kelsey attended parties with her classmates to celebrate the end of high school and enjoyed spending time with John. At this point, Kelsey had achieved everything she wanted, got into her dream college, and was in a fulfilling relationship with a wonderful partner who was planning to propose. Her life was bright and happy. However, her disappearance from a shopping mall parking lot on June 2, 2007 changed everything. Kelsey and her boyfriend John were about to celebrate a big milestone, 6 months of dating. To make it special, John planned to propose with a custom-made engagement ring and had booked a romantic dinner for they of them. Unaware of John's plans, Kelsey also wanted to surprise him with a gift. That Saturday, she got ready, drove to a nearby Target Corporation store, and called her mother around 7 p.m. to say she had found the gift but needed a special bag for it. Her mother suggested checking the mall across the street from Target Corporation for a romantic gift bag. Kelsey thanked her mother for the advice and promised to be home soon. John was supposed to pick her up at 8 o'clock. However, after that conversation with her mother never heard from Kelsey again. Kelsey failed to return home. When John arrived at 8 with a large bouquet of flowers, he was shocked and frightened to discover Kelsey's absence. Her parents were equally terrified, as it was unlike Kelsey to ignore phone calls and texts. She had vanished in a busy area during the daytime, and no one had witnessed her disappearance. Kelsey's father and two eldest siblings began searching for her. They found her car parked at the Oak Park Mall, which gave them a glimmer of hope that she might still be inside the mall for some unknown reason. However, after thoroughly searching the mall, inquiring with salespeople and security guards, they concluded that Kelsey was not there. Upon returning to the car, they found it undisturbed with no signs of struggle or violence. Kelsey's father, a former police officer, decided not to touch anything to preserve potential evidence, as the car might be part of a crime scene. Kelsey's parents reported her missing to the police the same day, but the police were initially hesitant to start searching right away. They explained that since Kelsey was 18, she wouldn't be considered missing until 24 hours had passed. However, Kelsey's father, who had connections, insisted on an immediate search. He also asked hospitals in the city if a woman matching Kelsey's description had been admitted. That evening, the police interviewed Kelsey's family and John to confirm their whereabouts and rule them out as suspects, a standard procedure in missing person cases. The police also reviewed surveillance footage from the Target store, which showed Kelsey entering the store, browsing, making a purchase, and leaving while talking on the phone to her mother. She was asking her mother about a gift bag and then drove to the Oak Park Mall across the street, as her mother suggested. Kelsey parked her car near the side entrance of the mall, close to the wall. Her car was inspected by experts and appeared to be untouched from the outside. The gift for John was on the passenger seat, and her backpack with personal items, including a tablet and wallet with $300 in cash, was in the back. Since everything was still inside, robbery was quickly ruled out as a motive. It appears Kelsey only left with her credit cards and phone, as everything else was still in the car. There were no signs of struggle, blood, or damage, and the only unknown fingerprint was found on the driver's seatbelt, which did not belong to Kelsey, her family, or boyfriend. The investigation tried to track Kelsey's location through her mobile phone signal, but the device was inaccessible, possibly turned off or damaged. Despite this, it was possible to determine the last known location of the phone to narrow the search area. However, Verizon Communications, the wireless carrier, delayed providing the necessary data for several days. Instead of refusing to cooperate, the company kept promising to look into the matter, which effectively slowed down the process. In 2007, telecom companies were permitted to keep subscriber information from law enforcement, including police and FBI, without a court order. They based this on data protection laws. Not even situations where someone's life was in danger were exempt from this rule. A closer look at surveillance footage revealed a disturbing detail: a mysterious stranger was stalking Kelsey. The man initially did not attract attention because he kept a safe distance and did not interact directly with Kelsey. He was a Caucasian man between the ages of 20 and 25 with dark hair, short and a light beard, wearing a plain white t-shirt and black shorts. He followed Kelsey into the Target store about 30 seconds and continued to follow her from a distance as she browsed the various sections. The surveillance cameras captured his movements, and his behavior was later described by the prosecution as similar to a predator stalking its prey. After Kelsey left the store, the man followed her to the Oak Park parking lot in his Chevrolet truck, waiting until she was alone. It's possible that he overheard her conversation with her mother, as he was standing close by while she was on the phone. This may have allowed him to learn about her plans to visit the nearby shopping center. Unfortunately, Kelsey had parked her car in a poorly lit spot, next to a side door and a storage area, which made it difficult for the cameras to capture what happened next. As Kelsey sat in her car, the man parked his truck beside her and got out, wearing the same white t-shirt and black shorts. The stranger came up to her on the driver's side and, likely threatening to harm her, forced her to get behind the wheel of his Chevrolet. The truck then drove away in an unknown direction. Due to Gregory Smith's connections and experience, he believed that the more attention and coverage the case received, the higher the chances of finding their daughter and bringing the perpetrator to justice. As a result, the story was featured in both national and international media, including the popular show America's Most Wanted. When surveillance footage showed the stranger following Kelsey, the clearest images of his face were broadcast on the news, urging viewers to come forward if they recognized him. The police received calls from people claiming to have seen the man in various cities and states, although most of these reports turned out to be incorrect. Each lead was investigated. On June 6th, a woman named Mrs. Miggs called the police, stating that she recognized her neighbor, Edwin Hall, from the footage. Initially, she had hesitated to report it due to doubts, but the information about the truck removed her last doubts, as Edwin owned an old 1970s Chevrolet. On June 6, 2007, two significant events occurred in the investigation. The police received crucial data from Verizon Communications about the last known location of Kelsey's phone signal. This information pinpointed a specific cell tower, allowing the police to establish a 1.1-mile search radius to the north. Within 45 minutes of starting the search, Kelsey's body was found in the brush near Longview Lake, Missouri, about 30 meters from where she was abducted. The medical examiners determined that she had been brutally assaulted and strangled with her own belt. Kelsey's body was discovered without clothing, except for the belt used to strangle her. Her body was carelessly discarded in the bushes, partially covered with dry branches. Over the 4 days it lay exposed to the June sun, her remains were severely disfigured by insects and wildlife, making them almost unrecognizable. Despite the state of her remains, the examination confirmed that the body was indeed Kelsey Smith. The second major event on June 6 was the arrest of the main suspect. When police arrived at his residence, he remained calm and acknowledged that his friends called him Jack. He agreed to provide a statement at the police station. During the interrogation, Edwin Hall claimed he had never seen Kelsey before, even when shown a photograph of her. When presented with surveillance footage from the store that showed him following her, he insisted that he had only visited Target for personal reasons and hadn't noticed her. He suggested that their appearance together in the footage was just a strange coincidence. Despite being shown irrefutable evidence, Edwin seemed confident that he had covered his tracks and couldn't be held accountable. He had thoroughly cleaned his van and had used protection during the assault, leaving no DNA evidence behind. However, Edwin agreed to cooperate with the investigation and provided his DNA sample and fingerprints. A crucial piece of evidence emerged when his fingerprints matched those found on Kelsey's car's seatbelt buckle. A thorough search of his home also revealed a hidden air pistol with Kelsey's DNA on the barrel. Edwin was officially charged with abduction, assault, and murder. A jurisdictional issue arose, as Kelsey was abducted in Kansas but her body was found dead in Missouri. This was important because it affected the potential sentence. In Missouri, Edwin faced the possibility of a capital punishment trial and sentence. Edwin realized the seriousness of his situation and, after consulting his lawyer, decided to confess to the crime and provide details in the hope of a reduced sentence. He described how he had noticed Kelsey entering the store and followed her, getting close enough to overhear her phone conversation about visiting the shopping center across the street. Edwin waited until Kelsey was alone, then followed her to the adjacent parking lot. He was pleased when she parked in a secluded spot near the side entrance. He got out of his vehicle, armed with a pistol, and waited for Kelsey to return to her car. As she was getting into the driver's seat, he prevented her from closing the door. Kelsey had already pulled out the seatbelt, and Edwin allowed her to buckle up, leaving his fingerprint on it. Edwin then put the pistol barrel in Kelsey's mouth, threatening her to move to his vehicle's driver's seat. Kelsey drove Edwin's truck while he aimed the gun at her and gave her directions. When they reached a remote area at the state border, Edwin ordered Kelsey out of the truck and led her into the bushes. There, he assaulted and strangled her with the belt, then covered her body with branches. He thoroughly cleaned his truck to eliminate any evidence of Kelsey's presence, including fingerprints and DNA. He then hid the pistol, which had Kelsey's saliva on it, in his home, believing it would never be discovered. When questioned about his motive, Edwin failed to provide a clear answer, instead making a comment about the victim's physical appearance. During the investigation, several other women and girls came forward, revealing a pattern of abuse and harassment by Edwin. Further investigation uncovered more instances of Edwin's wrongdoing, including coercing a 14-year-old neighbor into intimacy, harassing a waitress, and fleeing a restaurant without paying. These findings led to additional charges, including corruption of a minor, harassment, and theft. Edwin's lawyer attempted to garner sympathy from the court by highlighting his client's troubled childhood, past victimization, and unstable upbringing. Despite these efforts, the defense was unsuccessful. Edwin's lawyer was the only person to speak in his defense and show support. Notably, Edwin's wife attended all court hearings but chose not to defend her husband, instead sitting quietly in the background. On September 16, 2008, a Johnson County judge sentenced Edwin Hall to 27 life sentences without parole. After hearing the verdict, the defendant apologized to the Kelsey family for his actions and broke down in tears. He is now serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Kansas. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan grew up in Canada, in a large family with his parents, Bill and Susan. Bill works at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and spends time on his many interests, including sports, yoga, and psychology, which help balance family life. In addition, his wife, Susan, is able to manage the household, take care of the children, and keep their Toronto home clean. Passers-by often stop to admire the family's beautiful and blooming garden. Although Susan loved her sons equally, but Brett seemed to be less criticized because he was generally well-behaved. Brett was very clever at getting out of difficult situations, which gave the impression that he was a good boy, although this was not always the case. Brett was extremely popular in school, with everyone wanting to be his friend or at least be able to greet him by name, just like his older brothers. After high school, Brett attended university, driven by a desire to surpass his brother's achievements. To earn extra money, he placed an ad in the local newspaper, offering to paint houses and fences for Toronto residents. At first, his business was quite successful and Brett felt proud, especially with his first income. His mother, Susan, was thrilled and often cited him as a role model for others. However, things took a turn when Brett dropped out of college to focus full-time on his paint business. Without a degree, he had to work full-time as a paint salesman, which deprived him of formal education and exposed him to paint fumes on a regular basis. For a while, Brett felt confident and superior to his brothers, but this soon changed. After a couple of years, his brothers, Christopher and Leland, graduated and landed jobs in their specialized fields. Christopher worked for the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. As they established their careers and moved out of their parents' home, Brett's power began to diminish significantly. To save money on rent, Brett continued to live with his parents and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. Brett's financial situation grew more dire over time. By 2007, when he turned 26, his debt had surged to more than $60,000. This burden led to depression, but despite his inner turmoil, Brett maintained a cheerful exterior, always willing to lend a helping hand and participate in volunteer work. His friends and acquaintances were unaware of the immense emotional pain he was hiding. Brett faced a severe situation on October 28, 2007. With winter approaching, he had no orders. Left with no other choice, Brett wore his oldest clothes, including a hat, a long sweater his brother had given him and a long scarf his mother had knitted. It was the first time he had worn the scarf, but it was finally coming in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Brett stood in line at the bank, holding a thick folder and favoring his right foot as he waited his turn. When the bank employee called him forward, he approached her and spoke in a hushed tone. He calmly informed her that he had a gun and urged her to remove all the cash from the register and hand it over to him. He warned her that if she didn't comply, he would start shooting, and she would be the first person he would harm. She, with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett quietly exited the building, careful not to draw the attention of the guardians. Once outside, Brett took off running. He counted the money he had stolen from the bank, but it wasn't much, just over $1,000. To pay off his debt, he calculated that he would need to rob about 60 more banks, a crazy idea, but to him it seemed like the only option. For the first few days, Brett was fearful that the police would somehow catch up with him, so he avoided going home. He told his mother he had a job in a neighboring town and spent his nights sleeping in his car. Periodically, Brett would sneak back to his house to check if there were any police cars staking out the area. Finding none, he felt reassured that he was in the clear. The first robbery was followed by a second, then a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett changed his clothes, opting for second-hand or discarded items he found in the trash. He would burn the used clothes after each crime. Brett also bought a beard from a costume party store to further disguise himself. Brett committed a string of bank robberies in the Toronto area, and his distinctive beard made a lasting impression on the witnesses. His total intended theft across all instances never exceeded $3,000. Brett's luck ran out when police spotted his car on surveillance cameras and followed him home. They tracked his exact route, gathering details from various vehicles to prove his guilt. Further inquiries yielded little new information, so the authorities closely tracked a particular road in an attempt to shed light on the case. Their patience and hard work finally paid off. They found a potential lead. This person of interest, a bearded man, was found walking alone near a bank and was promptly detained by the officer for further investigation. Brett was under investigation for 7 months before being charged with robbery with a firearm, despite having a gun permit. Notably, he never actually carried a gun or any other weapon during the robberies. He didn't even bring a kitchen knife. Initially, he was charged with 19 counts, but after multiple appeals filed by him and his family, only 8 of those counts were upheld. Upon being given the opportunity to apply for parole, Brett submitted a petition. In it, he asked the authorities to consider the circumstances that led him to commit the crimes, including severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and a significant amount of debt. He also reiterated that he had never intended to harm anyone during the robberies, as evidenced by his lack of weapons. His remarks were taken into account, but as a condition of his potential parole, he was required to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive impact on Brett. During his time in prison, he had lost touch with his family, but he took the initiative to reconnect with them. The positive changes in Brett were noticed by the commissioners, and on November 24, 2010, he was released from prison. However, the freedom he had fought so hard for turned out to be more challenging than he had anticipated. Prior to his career as a painter, Brett struggled with deep emotional pain that weighed heavily on him. He had previously been a bank robber and served time in prison, which damaged his reputation. As a result, no company would hire him, and even those who initially hired him for house painting services would cancel once they discovered his true identity. The neighbors, who once admired Susan's garden and visited frequently, now spread unpleasant rumors about the family. The Brett family quickly sold their house and relocated to Scarborough. Susan started a new garden, and Brett found a job with a trading company. Although the pay was low, his parents helped him financially to rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist, who consistently advised him to maintain a strong connection with his family. Brett's life took a turn for the better when he met Kristen Baxter in September 2011. Kristen was an amazing person who had her own apartment with a stunning sea view. She was also into sports, which helped her stay in shape. What Brett appreciated most about her was that she didn't care about his past. They enjoyed traveling together, including a trip to Australia. Brett's parents were thrilled to see their son in a happy relationship and were confident that Kristen would encourage him to reach his full potential. However, just when everything was going well, tragedy struck. Brett's father passed away, leaving him in shock and sending him into a depressive state. As a result, Brett started visiting his psychologist more frequently to cope with his emotions. Brett was juggling two responsibilities: supporting his mother financially and nurturing his relationship with Kristen. They were both young adults, eager to build a stronger and more significant relationship with each other. Brett fell deeply in love with Kristen and decided to carry out an important plan. He had some savings and, after discussing his plans with his mother, decided to propose to Kristen with a ring. His mother supported his decision and gave him money to buy a ring. Although Kristen didn't need an expensive gift, Brett chose a gold ring with a large diamond to make the proposal special. Kristen happily accepted his proposal. As they began planning their wedding, Brett agreed with Kristen's decisions, but he was worried about the high costs and how they would affect his job. Brett found a job opening at a large technology company on the internet and applied for it. He updated his resume and submitted it, and was even invited for an interview, which he successfully passed. As a result, he was offered the job and was thrilled. He eagerly shared the news with his fiancée and mother, and asked them for money to buy an expensive suit for work. His mother agreed to help him, and he purchased the suit. However, just as Brett was about to start his new job, the company called him to inform him that they had to withdraw their offer. The security department had discovered his past criminal record, and the company could no longer hire him. This news was devastating for Brett, and his mood plummeted. He felt like giving up on his job search and education, wondering why he was wasting his time applying for jobs that he would never get due to his past mistakes. He decided that it would be better to use the money his mother and brothers had given him for something else. Brett had dropped out of university, but he didn't tell his family or his counselor. To maintain the illusion of success, Brett would wear a suit and tie, then change into casual clothes on the way to his job as a house painter. He would tell his relatives that he worked in an office. To further deceive his loved ones, Brett would post fake photos on social media, pretending to be at work or attending business events. He would also fake phone calls, making it seem like he was busy with work-related issues. Brett's family had no idea that he was hiding the truth about his life. As Brett's wedding to Kristen approached in September 2016, his deception reached new heights. He rented an expensive restaurant for the reception, which cost $100 per guest. His family was thrilled, believing that Brett had finally turned his life around with a prestigious job and a beautiful fiancée. However, Brett's deceptions became so overwhelming that he could no longer control his lies. Brett's wedding was just a month away, and he was struggling to cover the costs. He had been borrowing money from his mother, but when she could no longer help him, he pressured her to find a higher-paying job. Meanwhile, he was planning a bachelor party and had invited all his friends and brothers. Brett had a secret. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer for a technology company. When he finally confessed to his counselor, the counselor advised him to come clean to his mother. After much procrastination, Brett told his mother the truth, which devastated her. She bragged to everyone about her son's success. Brett's mother demanded that he tell his fiancée, Kristen, the truth, threatening to do so herself if he didn't. She also warned him that his brothers were aware of the situation and were on her side. However, Brett couldn't bring himself to confess to Kristen, despite knowing that the wedding was unlikely to happen due to his deception. With less than a month to go before the wedding, Brett remained silent, knowing that Kristen deserved to know the truth before it was too late. Brett was anxious about his mother revealing a potentially scandalous secret to his fiancée, Kristen. Every time her phone rang, he would tense up, holding his breath until he realized it wasn't his mother on the line, but rather one of Kristen's friends inquiring about her wedding plans. Eventually, Brett came up with a plan to silence his mother for good. As a convicted felon, Brett was prohibited from owning firearms. He decided to use a crossbow, a silent and deadly weapon, to carry out his plan. Interestingly, his late father had taught him how to shoot a crossbow at targets in their garden, a hobby that Brett had excelled at. Brett purchased the crossbow and arrows at a local sporting goods store and hid them in his garage, disguising them among construction debris. He also created a fake alibi by rigging his computer to automatically post pre-written comments on YouTube. He achieved this by attaching a spoon to a fan, which was connected to his computer. The fan was set to a timer, making it seem like Brett was actively using his computer at the time of the crime. Brett made everyone believe that he spent the whole day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. However, on the morning of August 25th, he had other plans. He put on disguising clothes that concealed his face, sneaked out of the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. He wants to eliminate anyone who might stand in the way of the peaceful life he and Kristen are building. When Brett arrived at his parents' house, his mother, Susan, was taken aback by his unexpected visit. She wasn't feeling well that day, but Brett persisted in persuading her not to reveal his plans to his future wife. Despite her poor health, Susan firmly refused to comply with Brett's demands. As he continued to pressure her, Brett's anger escalated, and Susan sensed that something was terribly wrong. She noticed the crazed look in her son's eyes and warned him that she had already called for help and that Christopher was on his way. Brett's anger reached a boiling point. He rushed to the garage, grabbed a crossbow, but his rage and adrenaline surge made him unable to aim properly. Instead, he used the crossbow's butt to bludgeon his mother. To ensure she was dead, he tightened a rope around her neck. After covering her body with plastic bags, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows, ready to face whoever was coming next. Brett's brother Christopher was lured into a trap by the suspect. As he entered the garage or the yard, Brett, who was hiding in the bushes, ambushed and shot Christopher in the neck. Christopher died shortly after the attack. Alexander, the youngest brother, was the next target. The suspect had also managed to lure him, but Alexander's outcome was different. Shot in the neck with an arrow, Alexander was critically injured but didn't die instantly. He screamed and cried for help as the attack took place. Throughout this violence, Leland remained asleep on the second floor, oblivious to the crime happening nearby and to the identity of the perpetrator, who was also a family member. It was Alexander's screams that startled Leland out of sleep, ran downstairs, and stumbled upon the horrific scene of his brother Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and Leland ended up in control, forcing Brett to back down. Leland immediately fled to a neighbor's house and called the police. With no means of escape, Brett remained in the house, realizing too late that his actions had disastrous consequences. In a desperate attempt to make amends, he composed a text message to Kristen, pleading for her forgiveness. Upon arriving at the scene, police officers found Brett, covered in blood, sitting beside his critically injured brother Alexander, who would later succumb to his injuries in the hospital. Brett voluntarily surrendered to the authorities, requesting to be handcuffed and taken into custody. During his confession, he revealed the location of his mother's body, hidden beneath packages in the garage, and acknowledged that she was beyond help. Brett admitted at the police station during the trial that he had not intended to kill Susan, but rather to scare her. In contrast, he had planned to kill Christopher and Alexander, who were witnesses to the crime. If they had not been present, they would still be alive. Brett attempted to justify his actions by citing his struggles with depression, but this did not lead to a more lenient sentence. Despite Brett's cooperation with the investigation and his voluntary confession, the judge imposed 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder. Brett will be eligible for parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor of the incident, has refused to speak to reporters, but he is well known in Toronto as the one who narrowly escaped the carnage.